Welcome to the Indie Scientology podcast. I'm your host Andy Nolch, and it's nice to be here listening to this fancy Strauss. This podcast has everything to do with the wacky, wonderful, interesting world of Scientology. Yes, that interesting religion you might have heard about. If you like it, subscribe to it. It's in iTunes, and it's on episodes of this podcast are on Andy Nolch's YouTube channel, Andy Nolch being me, Space Cowboy. Oh, watch out. If you don't know what Scientology is, then I recommend listening to the first few episodes of the podcast. Scroll down that page and find them, because they answer basic questions about Scientology, because it's a very complex thing. Some people never understand it. Hey, how'd you like that last show with the funky John Watson, huh? He was a bit interesting. It was a bit of fun, that one. I think we're about to go down the rabbit hole soon. Oh, I think it's coming up. Oh, I feel it. Oh, we're going down that rabbit hole into the wacky world of Scientology. Oh, up is up, down is down. Down is up, left is right. Right is left. What you thought isn't possible is possible. Welcome to the Indie Scientology podcast. I'm your host, Andy Nolch, and today's show is with Andrew Fleisher. Now, I noticed recently, I was trying to look up cool Scientology wins on the internet, and it was hard to find, which I thought was utterly ridiculous. And I went to the church's website and I typed in Scientology wins, or I typed in ordering, and I thought they'd have, or like reviews, and I thought they'd have like things saying, or showing like wins that Scientologists have had, because they're in some of the magazines, Scientology wins, and after people complete courses and stuff, you know, you write down your wins and that, and it was kind of hard to find on the internet. Like, I just thought that was really ridiculous, and I heard that the church is setting up a ScientologyWins.org website, which is cool, because you can just go to that and hear about people's Scientology wins. But I think Scientologists need to post more of their wins on the internet, because it's just kind of silly. It shouldn't be something that's hard to find. It should be something that's really easy to find. Now, here, get excited. This is from a beauty magazine in Australia called New Idea, and it's got an article about Scientology. So this is this week's Scientology news, and it's a bit scandalous. It's a bit interesting. So listen to this. It says, secret plot exposed. Irwin Scientology shock. Our favourite family have been targeted by the controversial sect. They're world famous, down to earth and adored by people young and old, and that, according to sources, makes the Irwins the perfect poster family for Scientology. In a bombshell report that will shock their Aussie fans, Women's Day can exclusively reveal wildlife warriors Terry, 52, Bindi, 18, and 13-year-old Robert are being targeted relentlessly by the controversial church, with Bindi being as particularly marketable. Sorry, it wasn't in New Idea. It was in, Women's Day. My bad. They want to make Bindi the poster child of Scientology, and insider claims. Bindi is very spiritual, especially after losing her dad at such a young age. This is Steve Irwin, you know, the crocodile hunter guy. This is their family. But she's also very bright and intelligent and beloved around the world. She is an inspiration to people young and old, and she's also pretty hot now. Like, she's now a woman and she's pretty hot. Sorry, that's a bit off topic. Naughty. I shouldn't have said that. All right. But what's her face? What's her name? Bindi Irwin. Yeah, she's a bit of a hottie, this one. Anyway, I'll get back to the article. All right. Scientology would love to bring her on board. That is the Church of Scientology. There is no secret Scientology leaders lean on celeb figureheads to promote the church. Tom Cruise, John Travolta, and Kirstie Alley have long touted their religion in Hollywood. This is a good point. The church hasn't had many big celebrities, like Scientologist celebrities, for a while. It's been like Tom Cruise and John Travolta for ages, and Kirstie Alley for ages. And yeah, it makes sense that they would want to get Bindi Irwin as a member in that. They need a whole new generation, you know. It's no secret. Wait. Now, these new revelations about the Irwins have fans fearing the worst, with all signs pointing to the fact that they may have already converted. Ooh. See, this is there's a lot of people who are members of the church who keep it secret. Like Will Smith, they just keep it secret, but they pretty much are. I heard that David Beckham is a member. That'd be really interesting if he actually was. The Irwins are no strangers to Scientology, with Bindi's wakeboarder boyfriend Chandler Powell, 20, having grown up in the Florida town of Seffner, just 40 minutes drive from Scientology's world headquarters in Clearwater. It's not the world headquarters. The world headquarters aren't in Clearwater. But anyways, this is what I'm talking about, how these beauty magazines don't really know what they're talking about. But anyway, before meeting Bindi, Chandler attended the University of Central Florida, where many in his social circle were involved with their religion. Chandler had friends growing up who were Scientologists, and he has a very open mind about these things, our source explains. He became friendly with a girl at university who was actively involved in Scientology. If there were ever arguments about it on campus, he was always very defensive about the religion. Chandler was always very defensive about the religion. Although Bindi is very confident and outgoing, if Chandler has been saying good things about Scientology, Bindi will have surely taken notice. Chandler isn't the family's only link to the controversial sect. Bindi and Terry have been friendly with Scientology devotee John Travolta since 2008, after they met at a Good Day USA event in New York just 18 months after Bindi's dad, Steve, died. Terry was starry-eyed to meet John, the source reveals. She has had a crush on him ever since Saturday Night Fever and Grease. And he was so sweet to her after Steve died. He was very supportive and really couldn't do enough for them. Bindi picked a song from John's cult movie, Pulp Fiction, while promoting Dancing with the Stars on US TV in 2015. We're told it was that very performance and her winning the series that made Scientology bosses sit up and take notice. When contacted by Women's Day last week, Steve's father, Bob, said, "I have my own personal thoughts on Scientology and I better not share them. I have no idea what Bindi and Bob are up to, so I'm not in a position to comment." Revelations about the Irwins' association with Scientology come at a time when church leaders are intensely focused on increasing their membership in Australia. Just last year, the church unveiled its new $57 million Australian headquarters located in Chatswood in Sydney. It's thought Tom Cruise will visit the centre while here to promote his new movie, The Mummy, alongside the Irwins' close friend Russell Crowe this week. With the family dividing their time between Australia Zoo on the Sunshine Coast and the US, Terry's purchase of a home in California for Bindi and Chandler early this year has only fueled speculation. They've been roped in by Scientology already. There's no denying they would make the perfect global ambassadors. Interesting, huh? I wonder if they are sires. They probably are. All right, now let's have a bit of fun, huh? We have got a win of the week. Independent Scientology win of the week. All right, let's have a listen to this. It's talking about the Purif. Plenty of my mates from the 70s should be doing this program. It would feel as if you've just lost 20 years off your age. It costed about $100 a day, but it's worth it. It's like a tropical resort that gives you your life back to you. Alertness, aliveness, vitality, virility, worth every cent. Virility. I want to look that up. Virility. Worth every cent. Let's look this up, Matt. Look this up. Virility. The quality of having strength, energy, and a strong sex drive. Virility. So alertness, aliveness, virility, vitality, virility, worth every cent. Wow, yes, we've got a bit of energy back. Good on him. All right, let's have a bit of fun. We've got a Scientology joke. Oh, get ready, okay? Why do Scientologists make great astronauts? They took up space in school. Oh, hilarious. Just gold. Absolutely gold, huh? Yeah, so, anyway. All right. It's now time for the interview with Andrew Fleisher. He is an independent Scientologist, and, I'll introduce him in a few seconds. It was a good long interview. It was an interesting interview. I think it's worth listening to almost all the way. I picked his brains. I asked him challenging questions, which I think is very good. But I got in there and I pressed him. There's a good 30-minute discussion about the OT levels, Excalibur, solo knots. In this interview, there's a good 30 minutes spent on that, and I ask him, I get the information from him. So I think it's worth listening to. I think you're going to enjoy it. So let's check out this interview. Today's guest interview is with independent Scientologist Andrew Fleisher. He has been a Scientologist for over 40 years. He left the church in the late 90s after a lot of dramas. He has done Ronzorg OT levels up to Excalibur. While in the church, he was a standard Dianetics auditor and CS. He says he is glad he experienced the golden age of Scientology, which he considers to be in the 70s as the course rooms were full. He used to be in the Guardian's office and says he is very proud that the church has labelled him a suppressive person. Andrew, welcome to the podcast. Are you there?
Yes.
Great.
I'm surprised you want to talk to me because I haven't done much, but hey, okay. I guess I've hung around long enough.
Yeah, well, you've had a lot of experience, so that's quite interesting. And you're also up in Sydney, are you?
I am.
Yep, good. But you're from America. What part of America?
My father was in the U.S. Navy, so we moved around a lot. I haven't lived there since the 1980s, so my roots are more in Sydney. I've lived in Sydney longer than anywhere.
And what was the main part of America that you were from? It was California, wasn't it?
No, because we moved. As a military family, we moved all over the place. So I spent time on the East Coast, the West Coast, and also was living in a couple of countries as we moved around.
Yep. And when you first got into Scientology, it was in California, though, wasn't it?
It was.
Yeah.
It was in 1973. I had been going to university, and I don't know what the cause was, but I was laying on my bed one day, and all of a sudden I had this exterior viewpoint that I've never had before. I wasn't into spirituality or anything. And all of a sudden I had this exterior viewpoint that wasn't just me looking at my body. It was actually totally exterior in terms of my personality and even the universe. And I don't know how to explain it. It's not something I've experienced since then or before then. And it was very scary. And it only lasted seconds. But that was the catalyst for me realizing I needed to look for something. I didn't have answers. And really my thought from then on was, what am I doing here? Not only what am I doing in university, but what am I doing on this planet? What am I doing in this universe? I was going to a military academy, so I wasn't exposed to the outside world. And the first time I was exposed to the outside world after that time was when I flew to my parents' house in July, which was about 2 months later. And I flew in the evening, and the next morning I was going down to the nearby university bookstore to buy some books on von Däniken, which is sort of the kind of books one might buy back then if you were looking for answers. And I was there too early, and I tried picking up this girl, and she turned out to be what was called a disseminator for a nearby church mission. And I went in there that evening for a lecture, I guess, a seminar, and they talked about communication and the triangle of affinity, reality, and communication. And basically I found Scientology within 12 or 24 hours of me starting to look.
Okay, so what was the name of this mission?
Stevens Creek Mission.
Okay, and that's in the what is it? Is that the?
It was in Cupertino. Well, no, it was actually in Santa Clara. I lived in Cupertino, and it was in Santa Clara. Later on, it turned into an org, but it was one of the large missions in the late 1970s that boomed in California.
And is this near San Francisco?
It's in the southern San Francisco Bay Area. If you know where Cupertino is, where Apple is, it's in that area. There's maybe an hour drive south of San Francisco.
Okay, so within 24 hours of having this epiphany that you're talking about?
No, within 24 hours of actually leaving the university where I was, because it was a military school, so I never really got out. So within 24 hours of the first opportunity to find anything, because in the school I'm not going to find anything.
Yeah.
They're teaching you engineering, basically. So within 24 hours, I ended up being on course.
Yeah. Well, that's good. It's good. It's efficient. So, what was this exterior thing you're talking about? So, are you saying you not only went exterior, which if people are listening who aren't Scientologists, I think it's pretty similar to astral projection or something like that, astral walking or something like that. You not only went exterior, but you also sort of had a big cognition or something.
Well, I wouldn't say that. But the problem is, and by the way, I don't know what astral projection is, so I'm not sure that going exterior is the same as that. But the thing is the funny thing is, it wasn't merely a perceptive viewpoint of looking at things, even though looking is sort of the wrong word to use when you don't have eyes. It was actually the fact that I had another view, not just of my body, but of my personality and the whole universe. It was like I was outside the entire universe, which is weird and scary, and I really don't know how to explain it, but that's what it felt like. So I can't really put it into words, and that's the closest I can get to it, but it was totally outside of everything.
Okay, so you didn't do the thing where you float like 3 meters into the air and can perceive.
No.
But you did this type of exteriorization that I've heard other people.
I didn't do it intentionally. It just happened.
Yeah. Because I had a friend who's a Scientologist, and he mentioned how he was kissing a girl or something, and I don't know, the theta was flowing or something, and they went out of this universe into like blackness or something, and all he could describe was some type of exteriorization or something. Was it kind of like that? Was there a lot of blackness or something?
No. I sort of know what you're talking about, because for a person that goes exterior from their body and they're used to using their eyes and their ears, theta perceptics, because when I say theta perceptics is we're used to being linked in electronically to our bodies and getting our data that way. But when you're not using them, it's sort of weird to say seeing or hearing, because you're not doing that. It's perceiving, you know what I mean? It's because seeing and hearing is a body-based perception. It's not a thetan or a spiritual-based perception. So I can understand that person saying that happening, but I'm not really into that whole exterior thing in terms of describing it and doing it and stuff like that. So I can't really comment on that person's experience. But I can understand that maybe happening, where all of a sudden they didn't have their eyes because they de-linked from them, and they go, whoop, it's black. Whereas if they actually spent some time doing that, they may have actually started to perceive things.
Okay, so you think that, yeah, because it's interesting when he described it to me. So you think it's more that he didn't really go into another dimension. It's just that he did do some type of they did do some type of exteriorization because they both did it together.
That's my totally uneducated. When I say uneducated, that's my opinion, but I've never spoken to them, and it's really for them to decide. But
Yeah, yeah.
but but if a person described that to me and said, "What do you think it was?" I'd say that's what I think happened. But I have very little knowledge because this is secondhand, third hand, really. So I don't know. I don't know what happened with them.
It's funny. It's funny. This guy I'm talking about because uh, he could almost do like exterior sex with a girl, and she could be on the other side of the world, and they could like unite like as theta somehow and be in the same area.
Okay.
It's funky. It's really, I know it's really out there and it's like really different,
Okay.
but if exteriorization exists, then obviously two thetans in two totally different locations can unite and, I don't know. It's something,
I've had communication sometimes happen across different parts of the planet. So yeah,
yeah.
why not?
Yeah, it makes sense. But it's interesting though, where there's this other idea of someone going into like some other dimension, like what you said that happened with you. Do you think it exteriorized into like another dimension or something?
I don't try to think about it. I don't worry about it. It's not something that's important to me. I just know that my view of the universe and everything became totally exterior, and I saw everything from my body from the. And once again, saw is the wrong word, but because that implies eyes. My perceiving was not just physical; it was personality and other things. And once again, it's really hard to describe because it's not in the usual realm of experience. We tend to create words based on our experience. As an example, I understand Eskimos have 12 different words for snow. They experience snow a lot. Whereas we just have one word, or maybe two if you want to call it slush. So the fact that I experience something that people probably rarely experience means we probably don't even have words to describe it in our language.
Yeah, yeah. But what you got out of it though was that, hold on, I want to find out what the hell happened or what's going on about life or something.
Not even for that event, but I basically realized there's something bigger I need to concentrate on, and I need to get some answers. So it basically started me on my road of looking because I experienced something totally outside my previous experience and something that nobody could tell me what it was. And it was pretty obvious when I got done with it. I couldn't even describe it, let alone ask a question about it.
And when you started doing your first course, was a comm course, was it?
Yes. Stevens Creek, the very first course they had you do was the comm course. I bought a book the first night. I was in Dynetics the previous life, and so which is probably why the book that I bought wasn't a starting book. I ended up buying The History of Man as the first book, and I went on to the course immediately, and it was a pretty thorough course. It was run excellently. We did the TRs all the way up through 9, the communication drills all the way up through number 9. I'm using acronyms and I shouldn't, but TRs, for those people who aren't Scientologists, TRs training routines, and it's the term we use for communication drills. So I did those all the way up through number 9, which are very thorough and gave me a lot of skills, totally changed my life. In terms of my views, many other things. And it took months to complete. It wasn't a quick course. It took months. It's the best money I ever spent, the best $50 I ever spent.
Were you a little bit put off by reading History of Man at that stage? Because that's a bit of a high gradient.
No, but there's many things that one reads, not just in Scientology, but anywhere that you go, okay, I don't necessarily understand all this, but I'll sort of take it in and see whether I can align it later. I've done that in many ways, reading things and either not agreeing or not getting it all. And there's nothing wrong with that. Um, so that's the way I encountered it. And I understand more of it now than I did then. But hey, that was my attitude. I didn't necessarily think that I had to agree with or understand every single iota of everything that I read and be able to relate it. Because to me, a lot of wisdom, whoops, my camera just
That's all right.
to die. To me, a lot of wisdom isn't necessarily totally understanding something when you read it. It might be actually aligning it later and going, oh my God, that thing that I read a half an hour ago or a week ago or a month or a year ago, I got that now. Sometimes we have all this information that we've never aligned. And that's where we get wisdom and that's where we get knowledge, not necessarily from data that we read. So it was more data that I took in and said, okay, maybe I'll dig it later. And gradually I have understood more of its relevance.
Yeah. I was pretty similar in that, like, when I first got into it, you read things and you're like, oh, I don't know if this is true. Like, and then now that I've met a lot of interesting people and studied a lot of things, that I've got a lot more mass on some of the stuff Hubbard's talking about. Like, for example, I've actually met someone who can bend a spoon with his mind. It's possible. It's not, but I remember when I first heard a Scientologist mention it to me in 2011, and I was kind of like, oh yeah, I'll believe it when I see it. That's sort of that positive talk, like, life's great, you can bend a spoon with your mind, and I kind of just thought, that was just some, like, super positive idea, you know what I mean? It was just a positive, nice thing, but life really wasn't like that. And then you find out that life really is like that, and it really is amazing, and all this incredible stuff can really happen. This isn't just made up stuff. It isn't just like it's a nice attitude to think that you can, really make the impossible possible. It's like, no, the impossible is possible. It's incredible.
True.
Can you see a little bit further back? Could you? Yeah, it's a little bit better. Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
There's a couple of books that aren't even, they're written by a guy that isn't even a Scientologist, at least to my knowledge. I don't think he's done it. He's been in Scientology. That really, to me, gives an outside perspective about what Scientology is about. Not necessarily the detail of the mind and what we do with the mind, but the perspectives of anything being possible. And that's books by Richard Bach. And even in the 1970s, when I got into Scientology, Jonathan Livingston Seagull was in the missions in California, at least the mission I was at. I heard that it was in others as well. And I reckon Jonathan Livingston Seagull and Illusions, if you read those, you actually get the perspective of what it's like. You get the perspective of what it would be like to be a spiritual being and being above the average daily constraints of what life in the physical universe supposedly constrain you to. So it's a good non-Scientological view of what Scientology is about from the spiritual aspect.
Interesting. So what was the name of that person again?
Richard Bach. He's an author.
Yeah.
And the book that was written, I don't know when he wrote it. It was probably in the late 60s or early 70s. Was Jonathan Livingston Seagull. And later on, I think the late 70s or early 80s, he came out with Illusions. Illusions, Handbook for a Wayward Messiah or something like that. I forget the full name, but something like that. And those are excellent books for just a nice light read. Both of them are good. I think Illusions is even better than Jonathan. Jonathan's a little bit esoteric.
Yeah.
Illusions is more real.
Yeah. It's fascinating stuff. You mentioned something about being a Scientologist in your past life.
No, Dianeticist.
Oh, Dianeticist.
Yeah, because I was born in 1953. So
I want to talk a little bit about that because I find that really interesting because I'm trying to understand how time works. And I've got this idea that you can drop the body and come back in the 1800s. Do you believe that's possible at all, or do you think it runs chronologically time? Like in a straight line,
Sorry,
like
you mean
linear.
you mean in other words, you're saying you can shift you can shift to a previous time when you're reborn? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, basically, I'm saying that it like there's evidence to suggest it's possible to basically do time travel. So you drop the body, and then you come back again, but you could come back again in the 1800s or back in 1952. You can come back again. Do you think that's possible?
No,
Okay, so you think
but that's an opinion. That's just an opinion. That's my opinion. So
so you think it's linear time?
yes,
Okay, all right. Yeah, I
I don't
mean,
know any. I don't know anything to refute that. I'm not saying it isn't. It's just my opinion. I wouldn't try. I wouldn't try to argue the point because I've got no data.
yeah. You know, I'm just trying to, because there's lots of people who said they were Scientologists in their past life, and I'm trying to work it out because it seems interesting, because it seems like then a lot of the people who were doing Scientology in the 50s just died. You know what I mean? It's like, what the hell? Like,
Well,
it just seems
I
like
don't
there's
know.
heaps of them. But, you know, it's a tricky area.
People die.
Yeah. But you know what I mean? Like from what I've heard, if there was, like, let's say there was in the 50s there was a massacre of Scientologists and they all died, like some, I don't know, Holocaust or something, then I feel it would make sense that there's heaps of people that were coming back that were claiming that they used to be Scientologists in their past life, if you know what I mean. But it just
Yep.
seems interesting that a lot of people, I don't know, it's just like, I don't know, it's just interesting. It seems like, did all these people in the 50s who were interested in Scientology, were they like all old men or something, or old women? But anyway,
No,
it's just another thing.
I was young. I did something. I did something stupid and killed myself. Basically, I'm not a suicide, but I did something stupid, and I won't go into it.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. So I
Uh,
wasn't old. I was just. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I believe, I definitely believe some of them. You know what I mean? I definitely
Yeah.
believe some of them, but I don't know, there's something strange going on with past lives and if they're all real or if they're not. I know there are people who are type 3 who just talk absolute shit. Like
Yeah.
Stephen Fishman, like the crap. Have you heard it stuff by Stephen Fishman?
No. But
Yeah,
it's not. It's not.
yeah,
This whole thing of past lives. It's not really important whether it's true or not. So in my perspective.
yeah, yeah. How could one get good reality on what's true or not? Is it really possible, or do you just have to sort of go by gut instinct? Or
Well, I don't know. If you read about Dante, or which is a philosopher, or the old Matrix philosophy is everything that you experience programmed, or did you experience it? What did you have for breakfast this morning?
yeah,
What did you have for breakfast this morning?
some toast and ham and eggs.
How do you know that you really had it? How do you know it wasn't something that was programmed and you're actually plugged into the Matrix? It's
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm not going to try to argue one way or the other. It's really somebody's perspective on life. Is it real or is it not real? So you could argue from here to eternity about it. It's not something that's really important. The important thing is it's been found that when you're doing the counseling, the Scientology counseling, which we call auditing, obviously, that when somebody finds some event that happens in what is thought to be a previous life, that there's a resolution to an issue because of it, either getting rid of a negative issue or attaining more skill or ability. And that's what's more important. To me, it's not important whether it's true or not. It's not important whether there are past lives. It's not important whether that event was exactly as that person perceives it. The important thing is that there's positive benefit. That's the important aspect. It's not relevant to argue one way or the other.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because that gets us onto like the OT3 story, in that it's kind of like is it there's this incident and you run it and the person gets benefit. So, I mean, is LRH saying this incident really happened?
The thing is again, it's not important. It's not important whether it's real or not. But keep in mind, Ron also has said in his writings that what's true for you is true for you. If you don't want to believe it, don't believe it. But if you want to do OT3, you do certain steps, right?
Yeah.
So you do those steps. Now, whether that event, as he recorded it, is true, again, it doesn't matter. It gets a result. So why are we going to argue whether it's, or debate whether it's true or not? You know, some people chide Scientology about that and, you know, try to raise all the specter of Xenu and all that kind of crap. Well, two things I would say to that. Number one, Ron actually wrote a non-confidential story. What was the name of it? Revolt in the Stars. Okay?
Yeah.
It's actually available online. It's something he wrote that people could read who weren't doing their levels after clear. And it's open for everybody to read. So the fact that there's a Xeno story is not a big deal. Go read the thing that's not on the OT levels, and you know what the story is. But whether the story is true or not, who the heck cares? There's a benefit to handling it, so you do it until the end result that you're expecting to get from handling it. That's the end of it. There's no sense getting excited about. And besides, you know, if you want to hammer Scientology about, oh, you've got this weird story, well, what religion doesn't? I've read a lot about a lot of religions, and if somebody said, what's your religion? I'd say, well, I've got several. I was raised Jewish. I'm also a Scientologist, but there's also aspects of Eastern philosophy and religions that is part of my personal philosophy in terms of there's good and bad in every event and every person. Yin and yang, there's all sorts of things that I have in my religion, my personal religion. So if you really want to hammer Scientology about the stories that are incredible, it means you have to make the same criticism about every other religion that I've ever read about. So what's the point?
Well, I reckon even if you just look at like the atom bomb, or you just look at technology, or just if you actually just look at the physical universe and what's possible and things that happen, it's absolutely incredible. Like, you look at a computer, like you got this little bit of metal or some shit and it holds all this memory in it. What the hell? Like, if you really look at the current level of technology and science, you have to believe it's just amazing and anything's possible, because it's just like, what the hell? Like, and they're talking about, you know, you can put like memories into a rock or something like that. Like, this is what, it's just like, I mean, how can you not believe in amazing things when you can just see the evidence? Just really look at science and look at the human body and one cell of the human body and what the hell it's capable of doing. It's incredible. It's just it's amazing.
Yep.
You know?
Well, that in itself is what some people term as evidence that there's a God. I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm just saying there are people who say, look at that. That could only have been created because there was something they call God that created it. I'm not saying that's true or false. I'm just saying that's what they say. If you read the Foundation series, which is a science fiction series, I can't remember who it's by. Maybe it was Asimov, but I'm not positive. It actually is a very good view on society perspectives and also governments in terms of how people get controlled. And one of the aspects was that one society on one planet controlled societies on other planets through what was considered religion and magic, which was really just science. But anyway, we're getting off on tangents here.
Yeah, but this is kind of interesting though, because you've done a lot of Scientology and the OT levels and stuff. So I am quite interested in your opinion of God.
You know what? I don't know if you've ever seen the video that was done by the British independent Channel 4 with Hardeep Singh in it.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that he asked that same question to several Scientologists, and none of them had a consistent answer with the other. Which is okay. There's nothing wrong with that, because the emphasis in Scientology is on the spirituality of the person, not of, as Ron has it, the supreme being or whatever that is. Okay? But my short answer is I don't know.
Yeah.
I tend not to think so, but I sometimes find the personification or the anthropomorphizing of God as being somewhat odd.
Yeah.
Because if God is really a God, those things that you're, why would you call him a he? Why would God be a male? If God is a God, why would he even have a body, which doesn't imply they're a male? So, to me, is there a single entity called God that created everything? I tend not to think so. But to me, it's not important. I don't worry about it. So I don't have an opinion, strong one. I don't have an opinion one way or the other. It's not something I consider important. And sorry for not really answering, but that's it.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's lots of things I don't have opinions about. God is one of them.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting.
But
Um.
it is interesting that you get many Scientologists in the room, and you'll get multiple perspectives.
Yeah. 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 Um. So speaking of these sort of OT levels and that, um, you you've done Excalibur at Ron's org,
Yep.
and uh, I'm just wondering, how long is it? Do you think if is this Excalibur is like Ron Zorg's version of solo knots that they do in the church? Is that right?
That's not totally precise, but it's close. Just for those people that aren't in Scientology, the concept is, as you've probably put on other videos, is individuals are spiritual beings. We have bodies, but we also have minds. We have minds that have positive aspects, and we have minds that have negative aspects. When we get rid of the part of our mind that is related specifically to us, we're clear. That's what's called clear. And then you start operating as a spiritual being, and you gradually improve that, and that's called the OT levels or operating Thetan levels. Now, when the thing is we've sort of not discussed what the similarities and differences are between the church and Scientology outside the church. So a lot of this was sort of getting into too steeply, but basically Excalibur is what is done in Ronsorg, and Ronsorg makes an attempt to follow what Ron said in regards to all of his writings and the perspective of the people in Ronsorg and a lot of other people outside the church and a lot of people who have left the church deliberately and may not even be related to Ronsorg, is that David Miscavige, who took over the church in the 1980s, has altered what Ron wrote about how counseling should be handled. There's some debate, and I'm not highly trained, but there's some debate about when the alteration started. There's an attempt in Ronsorg to actually do what Ron says exactly and no more, all the way up through the end of what's called OT3. Okay? That will differ from what's in the church. Something as simple as what a floating needle is. Now, a floating needle, as you know, but I'll just explain to anybody who doesn't, is a floating needle is a phenomenon on a meter that is used in counseling that's an indication that you're done with the process. It's one of the indications you're done with the process and the person has gotten the gains they're likely to get from that process. Miscavige has changed the definition of what that is. That screws up proper counseling. That's just one of many, many, many alterations. Ronsorg rejects anything Miscavige has done in that area and a lot of other things that have happened and tries to do exactly what Ron said. Now, when we get to Excalibur, Excalibur is what Ronsorg delivers to get rid of the mind, the case, as we call it, that the church intends to resolve in OT levels 4, 5, 6, and 7.
Okay, so in Excalibur you'll be receiving auditing, but also you'll be doing solo knots as well.
Not precisely, but close. Basically, what you're handling, the type of case you're handling in 4, 5, 6, and 7 is the same type of case that you're handling in Excalibur. Okay? The nature of the case is the same. So when you say the Excalibur case or the Knots case, it's the same. Knots means New Era Dianetics for OTs.
Yeah.
Right? As you know, I know you know, but I'm just mentioning for others.
Yeah.
The Knots case and Excalibur case are equivalent. The method is different. But not the method of handling it, the method of finding it, and that's the difference. Interestingly enough, there's accusations about Ron Zorg having altered Knots and messed it up and not doing what Ron said. While that's true to a point, it's not totally accurate to say that, because in actual fact, the way that you're handling the case in Excalibur is exactly the same way as you're handling the case when you're doing stuff in the church. A matter of fact, I would argue that you're actually doing more Ron, you're doing more LRH on the Excalibur course than you are in the church's courses. Because when you do your solo knots course, to be able to audit by yourself in the church, there's all sorts of issues that they've taken out, which are vital. I know this because I actually did it back in '89, and I've read all the issues. The church takes out vital issues that you should have to audit yourself on solo knots, and you don't have it. And in the Excalibur course, you're actually given a lot more information. So not only are you given what the church has taken out, you're actually given a lot more RON data to handle a lot more. So you're actually have a lot more knowledge and control, and therefore responsibility to be able to handle that case.
Okay, but on Excalibur, you'll need to actually pay an auditor to audit you, and then also you go and do solo auditing, right?
Yes, but let me make this clear. Usually in the church, you're doing OT4 and somebody's auditing you on OT4, and you're doing OT5 and somebody's auditing you on OT5, and there's a whole long list of things you're going through, and then you do your solo knots course, and then you do solo knots.
Yeah.
In Ron Zorg, it is true that you will get a certain amount of auditing from another person before you start doing it solo, but it's not anywhere near, or almost, we can't have absolutes, but almost, it's highly unlikely for you to be audited by another as much as you would be in the church, for two reasons. Number one, the beauty of Excalibur there's no difference in how you handle the case. The difference is in how you find the case. You're a lot more effective at finding the case. And basically, once your auditing skill and your perceptics, your ability to perceive, are up to the level of being able to perceive that case, the Knots case or the Excalibur case, they'll want to put you onto solo because it's a lot more effective. You auditing solo can handle a lot more than you can handle when you've got another person there. Because there's all sorts of, you're not just handling the communication. When you're auditing solo on Excalibur or solo knots, you're actually just auditing your case. When you've got another person in the room, you're having to interrupt you handling the case with talking with the auditor. And that adds a lot more time and slows it down. So in general, when you're doing Excalibur, yes, you'll have a bit of an audited Excalibur, but you're going to be getting onto doing it solo a lot faster than you will in the church.
Yeah, so because you said you did like 8 years or something on solo knots in the church, and you've done Excalibur now. So what is the big difference between the two of them? And obviously you like Excalibur much better, right?
Yes. The difference between the two, like I said, the method of handling the case is the same. You have a lot more tools to handle that case, but they're all Ron's tools. What's different is the ability to find the case. And because here's an analogy. Originally, when we started with Dianetics, with the book back in 1950, there was a method of handling Dianetics cases. But then standard Dianetics and the slight changes from standard Dianetics to New Era Dianetics were a big leap from the original 1950s book. The biggest leap was the fact that Ron used the knowledge of the structure of Dianetics mind, the Dianetics case, to find it more precisely and to handle it more precisely and to handle it more swiftly. That's a good analogy of the difference between solo knots and Excalibur. You have the tools, better tools for finding the case. Okay? Ron left some clues in his original writings about solo knots and knots that Miscavige and the people that he had left after he kicked the really competent people out couldn't see. And Captain Bill, who's the guy who created Ronzor, could see, hold on, LRH said this in the knots materials. That isn't expanded upon. Now, Ron, when he was developing Dianetics and the levels to audit the grades, he had decades and he had lots of auditors, he had lots of pre-clears that he could test things on. He didn't have that during when he was developing the knots. He was in seclusion a lot of the time. He didn't have loads of auditors. He didn't have loads of PCs. So in my opinion, this is just my opinion, he didn't have the resources to actually fine-tune the handling of the knots level. In my view, Captain Bill did that by saying, here's a clue Ron left. Here's something I found. Here's how we can actually find more case and handle a lot more swiftly. It's because it had what he communicated, Captain Bill communicated, is the structure of that case, that knots case or Excalibur case, so we can better find things and handle it. There's several analogies. One of them is when you're doing solo knots, you're shoveling with a teaspoon, and when you're handling it in Excalibur, you're doing it with a front end loader. Or when you're handling solo knots, you're using the leaves, you're picking the leaves off the trees. When you're doing Excalibur, you're actually ripping it out by the roots. And that's similar to the logic of the difference between Dianetics and standard Dianetics, the 1950s Dianetics and standard Dianetics. You're actually digging in, looking at the structure and using that to handle the case. I know a guy who was on solo knots for 8 years, not me, who basically I was talking to a few weeks ago, and he says he had got more gains off of 6 sessions where he was audited on Excalibur. He hasn't done the Excalibur course yet. He got more gain in 6 audited sessions of Excalibur than he got in 8 years of solo knots. He had more issues handled in those 6 sessions than those years of solo knots. I don't know how many hundreds of hours he would have put in of solo knots. That's his perspective, not mine. So you're really digging the stuff out by its roots. Ron talks about you handling other dynamics. That's only superficially true when you're doing church knots, in my perspective and my experience. I haven't CS others. I haven't case supervised others, so I'm just talking about from my perspective. But when you're doing it Excalibur, you are massively handling higher dynamics, third and fourth especially, groups and humankind case and aberrations, because we see it around us all the time. We talk about people's case having to do with lies. Look at the lies we see around us all the time in the world of humankind, organizationally, governmentally, so many ways. It's just a lot more effective.
So do you think you wasted your time when you're doing solo knots in the church?
I wouldn't say wasted it, because I got gains. I definitely enjoyed it. I definitely got gains, but I was a lot more effective when I was doing Excalibur.
Well, what if people? What do you say about people who think that it could just be squirrel?
I disagree. As I said, what you're doing when you're doing Excalibur, you're basically handling the case with the same tools that Ron gave us. The thing is the Excalibur course, you're given even more knowledge of the case. You're learning more LRH on the Excalibur course than you are on the Solo Knots course.
Yeah, but the paperwork that you're reading off, does it have signed by Captain Bill or signed by LRH? You know what I mean?
Both. The Excalibur course has everything in it that you get on the Solo Knots course, plus a lot more LRH. some of it about things that are that level, and some about things that are 1950s and 1960s. And you have what Captain Bill wrote, but what Captain Bill wrote is primarily about structure and about finding the case. And it's the processing that you're doing is still basically the same thing that you would be doing on solo knots. The basic commands, the commands that you're using are the same that you get on solo knots.
Okay, so
the same issues that LRH wrote.
Okay, so if somebody doesn't like the idea of doing anything that's written by Captain Bill, for example, can they go to Ron's org and read LRH material only and then do Excalibur? Is that possible at all, or can they?
You wouldn't be doing Excalibur; you'd be doing solo knots. But if you want to ignore what Captain Bill says about finding an additional knots case to do, I guess you can do that. It's sort of silly. It's like saying, well, I only want to do some of the grade 0, things. But yeah, they could, I guess. I mean, I don't deliver Excalibur because I'm not qualified to. But I guess you could. It'd be sort of silly.
Yeah, just because I heard that with Ron's org, that it's possible to do the original OT levels and not Excalibur, so you can do just the pure LRH if you want to.
You need to be careful about saying the original OT levels because a lot of people, well, I can't say a lot of people, the term original...
Yeah, but when I say original, I mean original as in not what the church released and changed. I mean the actual original.
And that's opening up a whole other thing because when people say original OT levels, they're talking about 4, 5, 6, and 7 that occurred before knots came out.
Yeah, they're actually squirrel, aren't they? They're squirrel. Yeah.
No. Hold on. They're not squirrel. The original 4, 5, 6, and 7 aren't squirrel. They were written by LRH.
Yeah, but the ones that the church, the new OT 4, 5, 6, 7 are squirrel that the church is running.
Well, I wouldn't call them squirrel. Here's the point I wanted to make is I've never read anything by Ron that said that handling the knots case in OT, in what the church calls new OT4, new OT5, new OT6, new OT7, were intended to cancel the original ones. I've never seen anything by Ron about that.
Yeah,
okay?
so randomly Ron went offline and then suddenly the church just changed those OT levels.
It seems like that to me. It seems to me, this is my opinion, because once again, I'm not highly trained. It seems to me that what you should be doing after you're done with handling your knots case is do the original 4, 5, 6, and 7. I remember amazing OT success stories in the advanced magazines in the 1970s and 80s that I don't know what level they were doing, but maybe they were doing those levels. Why doesn't the church market them? When I was in the church in the 90s, I never heard of them marketed. So when you said original OT levels, that's what that means. But getting back to the knots way, the way the church is doing knots, and the way Ron's org is doing the knots or Excalibur case, is I would say if somebody says, look, I want to do solo knots the way Ron wrote it. I don't want to do it the way the church does it, and I don't want to do Excalibur. If you went to Ron's org and says, that's what I want to do, I don't want to read anything by Captain Bill, they'd probably say, okay, we think you're silly because you're going to be not picking up things that you should handle. But if that's what you want to do, well, they'll probably deliver it. But you'd have to ask him. I don't deliver it. And that's something that you'd have to ask them about.
Okay, so you're sort of saying that LRH released these OT levels and he went offline, so he wasn't able to release his revision of them. And you're kind of saying that Captain Bill did a revision of these levels.
No, I'm not. Okay. First of all, I'm not saying that LRH had a revision. I'm saying he didn't finish fine-tuning.
Yes, that's what I'm saying, the fine-tuning. So like with Dianetics, LRH was around for 20 years to fine-tune it so he could release it in the church and fix it up. But LRH went offline, so he didn't have a chance. You're saying Captain Bill took over that hat and completed and finished the fine-tuning, and that's why he released Excalibur.
Yes, but he did not alter the processes. He only added to how you can find more case. That's the
Yeah.
point that I'm making. The
Okay.
method of handling the case is the same.
Yeah.
It's all LRH.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right. No, that sounds good. I mean, it makes sense. I mean, because yeah, I mean, he just had in '78. He had to just go off lines and that because of the whole issue with the Snow White Operation Snow White, and he went into hiding big time. So I mean, I guess he, you know,
I mean, for a lot of the time, from what I understand, his main communication to the outside world was via David Miscavige, and David Miscavige took advantage of that.
yeah.
Who knows how Miscavige screwed things up? I don't know.
Now, just speaking of these things like these original OT levels, right? The what is it, 4, 5, 6? Okay, so you do Excalibur, right? And then after that, do you do these original OT levels? These ones that you're saying that have great wins in the magazines?
Um, my opinion is that should be what's available. Um, I know Ron Zord makes it available. You can do 4, 5, 6, and 7 if you would like. The original 4, 5, 6, and 7. Um, I didn't do them. I went on to the next level that Ron Zord has because they have a lot more OT levels above and beyond Excalibur. But I'm saying that's something that you can do. And I'm saying the church, in my opinion, who doesn't have these other OT levels, in my opinion, the church, after somebody got done with their Knots case, which I now know after being on Excalibur, they're not done with their Knots case. From my perspective, and keep in mind I'm not a case supervisor, but from my perspective, with my personal experience, I can't see how somebody just doing solo Knots in the church can fully handle the Knots case. That's my opinion that I'm not going to try to push on others because I don't have awareness of other people's cases. I've never case supervised, but that is from my perspective. But when somebody's done with that case, I think the church should make 4, 5, 6, and 7 available instead of pushing them straight on to 8. But here's another thing. I also have an opinion that the church no longer is in the business of delivering Scientology. The church really doesn't want able people. They want robots. They want milk cows.
Yeah.
That's my opinion. So if 4, 5, 6, and 7 truly gives people's abilities, they sure as hell don't want people to be taking them. There's some people that think that the U.S. government take over the church. I don't know whether that's true or not. Really not important. But my observation is the fact that the church isn't interested in increasing people's abilities anymore like they were back in the 1970s. And that's primarily a result of Miscavige's perversion of the tech and the policy and the attitude of the church.
There's an independent Scientologist called Ralph Hilton, and when I spoke to him, I think I spoke to him a little bit about solo knots, and he had the impression that it takes really, really a long amount of time. And that's the way it's supposed to be. And I know he's not much of a fan of Ron Zorg. What do you think about his idea of solo knots and it taking a long amount of time?
I know of Ralph Hilton. I've never listened to him. I know he's got some videos, YouTube videos, where he either did them or he was interviewed, but I've not ever spent time listening.
Yeah, well, I interviewed him on the podcast, but yeah.
I do agree whether somebody, so I'm just giving you that caveat that I don't know a lot about him.
Yeah.
What I know of what he said is from what you just said.
Yeah.
I've got a fly that's coming to say hello. I agree with perspective that it takes a lot of time for a person to handle the Knots case, whether they're doing it with Excalibur or whether they're doing it with solo Knots. There's a lot there to handle. And a person's abilities and perspectives and ability to perceive change as they go through. What you can perceive at the beginning is a lot less than what you see as you move on. Your abilities definitely improve and your viewpoint changes through the process of going through Excalibur, no doubt about it. And my perspective, I keeping in mind I had already done hundreds of hours of solo knots, and I was about a year and a half auditing every day, almost every day, sometimes several times a day on Excalibur. I think I was on it about a year and a half. But my perspective on things changed through Excalibur.
What sort of wins do you get? Let's put it this way. What sort of wins?
They're a little bit esoteric. I mean, I don't have the ability to see through walls. I don't have the ability to, there's a lot of tricks that people like to go, well, can you do this? For instance, bending spoons, I don't do that. Not interested in doing it. I would definitely say that I have less effects on my body from case. Because there are some things that a human body just goes through. I wish I could find it, but I remember Ron saying somewhere that if you're going to run a human body and think you're not going to have problems with it, you're crazy. In other words, not everything is case. These are machines, and machines have issues. But basically, I have had very little or no issues come up due to case. I'm in my 60s, so of course, this body isn't running like it used to when I was in my 20s. But I'm finding there's a lot fewer issues now than before I did Excalibur.
Are you more clear? Are you more clear after doing it?
I think so.
And so what about after doing solo knots in the church for many years? What wins did you get from that?
Understanding. Very similar gains, but the quantity was a lot more on Excalibur. There's sometimes case that comes up regarding one's body, regarding relationship to others, regarding attitudes that you gradually sometimes can get to the point of picking up on it and handling it almost instantaneously, whereas before you did those levels, you might be wondering what the source is. And that's what I found amazing. It was interesting that I had a gap of quite a number of years between when the church illegally took me off solo knots until I did Excalibur. And during that time period, even though I wasn't in session, and I never deliberately went in session, I would sometimes have case come up and I'd go, wow, that's case. I basically handle it without even being in session. I knew enough Scientology from my solo auditing and from the levels and Dianetics that I'd read that I could easily handle that case. So it's that kind of ability that you end up getting. And it becomes, after you do Excalibur, I found I could handle a lot more complex case, a lot more easily, and not just more in terms of quality, but more in terms of quantity. Now, the types of case and the quantity of case that I could handle vastly increased. And it's sort of hard to explain what I mean until you actually get into the level, but that's as deep as I want to go into it.
Does this have anything to do with future lives? Like, as in, after you've done heaps of this solo knots, have you just got all this case handled that when you drop the body, you're not effect of things?
Well, you're talking to somebody who hasn't dropped the body yet, so I don't know. I mean, I as an engineer, I tend to be based on facts, not fiction and not deductions. My opinion is, yes. My opinion is, if all of a sudden I got shot in the head this minute and I lost my body, my opinion is, and it's an opinion only, I would be a lot more comfortable and have a better grip on being able to handle myself, the fact that I just lost my body, than had I not done Excalibur. And that's partially from what I did while on Excalibur, without going into details.
What if you suddenly had a new person arrive at work, and this person's really low toned, and one of those, I know I can get keyed in by people who are low toned. So after doing solo knots, and I guess after going clear, and you're around someone who's just real low tone. Let's say 3 other of his friends rock up and they're really low toned, and you have to actually work with these people. Can you not get keyed in by them and actually remain uptone and actually not get interpolated after you've done all this auditing?
I haven't had that issue. I'll give you an opinion. My opinion, the ability to do that would be more based on having done TRs, which increases your confront, and how much, Ron, you have studied in terms of being an auditor, the levels and Dianetics, and handling people. Because the TRs, if you go all the way through 9, it's about handling people, handling communication, getting things done. So I don't think that's a case thing. And also, to some extent, if you have good TRs, you're going to be less affected by case, even if you haven't had any auditing. So I think that's more based on having done a lot of TRs and training rather than necessarily having gone up the bridge.
Okay, because I was just thinking of...
But I will say one thing. Ron says that people who are auditors can better handle life. And I tell you, when you're handling case on Excalibur, you're handling much higher gradient case than you're handling on solo knots, and it makes you more confident about handling case, whether it's yours or another dynamics. So, and like I said, you're learning a heck of a lot more on the Excalibur course than you are on the solo knots course. So in my view, that in itself is also going to be a good tool to use.
I got a really interesting question, all right? And you can answer it without going to anything confidential. Jesus could walk up to people and apparently expel the demons out of them. So they would have some town nutter or something, and he'll go into the town and they'll be like, help him. And then Jesus would go, and then like the demons would leave, and somehow the person would be healed or something. Can someone who's done Excalibur almost do something like that?
First, I don't know to what extent those stories about Jesus are true. But there are many stories about people having that skill. Look at some of the what do they call them?
Exorcist.
No. Well, I wasn't thinking of exorcist. The word ecumenical comes to mind, but that's not the word. Evangelical. Some of the evangelical churches, like in the U.S., where they cast out demons from people, they supposedly do that. I don't know. The thing is I don't go around doing that. I don't know whether others can, but there are other things that people do that one can wonder. Okay, where do people get the skill of being able to talk with someone and be in contact with a loved one that has died? There are some people that you see videos of these people who will go to a seance and they'll contact the dead relatives of the people that are there. Why can't somebody have that skill? That doesn't seem to me to be necessarily related to auditing. Some people get skills even when they're not Scientologists. There's many paths. Scientology just happens to be one that's, in my view, more likely to get an end result like that of somebody developing a skill.
But with this Jesus example, do you think someone who's done solo knots would more be able to do something possibly like that and handle the town nutter? Or would they have to spend many...
You mean by expelling demons?
Yeah.
Don't know. I'm going to no answer it.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Yeah, they're tricky questions. Now,
Maybe it depends on the person. It depends on the demon. I don't know.
yeah, 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 yeah. Um, well, let's go back to when we went off topic. It was when you joined Scientology, and how long was it until you joined staff?
I got into Scientology mid 1973. Excuse me. Let me just blow my nose for a second. Um, and I was in the San Francisco Bay Area. I got on staff in 1975 down at San Diego Org. Um, I was initially what was called a guardian office Scientologist, which sometimes was a volunteer thing when you're not on staff. But in this case, I was paid staff. Not that pay was very high, but I was paid staff, but I was working under the guardian's office. But back then, I seem to recall a function called Keeper of Tech that I think later on was under the LRH communicator, but back then I think it was part of the guardian's office. Anyway, the person who was responsible for that put me into the qualifications division in the org. And I was told that I was a cramming officer. First of all, I had to find out what a cramming officer was. And then when I found out what a cramming officer was, which for people that don't know, when a counselor or a course supervisor needs correction or anybody else needs correction, they go to the cramming officer who finds what is the reason why and gets that person to study or do drills to perfect their technique. So I had to understand auditing, I had to understand course supervising, I had to understand cramming. So I started reading a whole bunch of issues, Dynamics courses, the levels, course supervising, and cramming, and started cramming people. I did that for quite a bit of time, sometimes doing a little bit of guardian office stuff at the side. And in early 77, after being on staff at San Diego maybe for a year and a half or so, I was sent over to Guardian's office worldwide at St. Hill.
Hold on, but before that though, you were doing some CSing and standard Dynetics auditing?
I wasn't doing any CSing. While I was at San Diego Org, I did the Standard Dynetics course, one of them, because it was the Hubbard Standard Dynetics course, but there was also a course where you learn Standard Dynetics by using the Dynetics Today book. And that tended to have not just Standard Dynetics, but a lot of what was also in the Hubbard Qualified Scientologist course.
Were you doing any CSing at all?
No. I did the Standard Dynetics course, and I did the Standard Dynetics course case supervisor course, but I did not do those as a post. I did those courses. Yeah.
Okay, all right.
My technical work when I was in San Diego was as the cramming officer.
Okay, so you didn't spend heaps of time doing like auditing people on Standard Dynetics?
Correct, I did not. You have to do some Standard Dynetics courses. Sorry, you have to audit some Standard Dynetics sessions to finish the course, and I did that, but I didn't do the internship, and I didn't do it as my post or my role. I wish I had, because one of my skills that I don't have, even though I'm a solo auditor and done it for hundreds of hours, is I haven't spent a lot of time auditing others, and I wish I had developed that skill. It's one of my few, I don't want to use the word regrets, but one of my things that I would change in hindsight is I would have developed my non-solo auditing skills. That's one thing I would have changed.
With Standard Dynetics, that's on the e-meter, is it?
It is.
It is, okay. So it's, okay, because I mean, the church doesn't deliver it, do they?
Standard Dynetics was overtaken by New Era Dynetics, and there are some changes, but they're not extreme. If you've studied Standard Dynetics, you can easily move into New Era Dynetics very quickly by reading a few issues. They were very, very similar. For instance, I don't know how many there are in NED, but for instance, in Standard Dynetics, there was commands 1 to 9 and A to D, or F if you took another route, as I recall. It's almost identical in NED, New Era Dynetics, and how you decide what to audit in New Era Dynetics is slightly different, but it's If I had to put a number on it, it's probably 95% the same.
And out of curiosity, when before Ned got released, above grade 4, would you see it say standard Dianetics on the bridge when you were in the church in the 70s?
When I got into the church, Dianetics was done before the grades.
And was it called standard Dianetics?
Yes.
Okay.
And the Dianetics course was done before the levels were done. Now it's turned. Now it's the other way.
Now at Ron's org, do they do standard Dianetics before the grades?
I asked that question, and the answer is it depends. It depends on the person, because for some people it's better to handle grades first, and some cases it's better to handle Dianetics first. That's the answer I got.
Okay, yeah. All right. And so you started, how did you get into the GO? Like, how did that happen?
Well, I started, when I got on staff, I was a Guardian Activity Scientologist on staff. So I was operating under the GO anyway. I wasn't in the Guardian's office in San Diego. I was working for it. And then they had a need at St. Hill, at Worldwide, and that's when I joined the Guardian's office.
And what did you do?
Paper pushing, basically.
Okay. Did you get to do anything exciting, like any sort of special activities?
No. Special activities? No.
Did you come across any juicy, interesting paperwork while in the GO?
Juicy paperwork. I don't know what you mean by juicy.
Oh, just interesting things, confidential stuff.
Oh yeah, there was lots of things that were interesting. I was Snow White Programs Chief for a whole 30 days, but it was so much paper shuffling that I never even got to do much. And that was not a permanent appointment. That was just because something happened to the previous person. My initial role when I was there was what was called security officer, but it wasn't security. What it was they implemented what was called security clearances. And in my view, it was, in hindsight, it was just paper shuffling. It didn't resolve anything. It required people to submit information about their background for them to get a clearance level, A, B, or C, if I recall correctly, that would determine what kind of access they had. But it didn't do anything to fundamentally handle security. In hindsight, from what I've read, it sounds like there was plants in the church and possibly even the Guardian's office, which is one reason why certain actions were taken that shouldn't have been. But that's opinion. It's not fact, because I don't profess to have all the facts. But in hindsight, that's what I think. I think basically my time doing that was a waste, and it didn't handle the real issues.
How many years did you do that for?
I don't recall. Keep in mind, I was there from early 77 until late 82. So I was at St. Hill for that amount of time, but I wasn't doing that post for the entirety of the time. I did a lot of other things.
For GO or for what?
In the Guardian's office, yeah. I was in the Guardian's office the whole time I was there.
And what were some of the other things?
I also did projects at various times. Once again, it was more paper pushing than doing anything, because when you're up at the international level, you're not necessarily out there doing something. You might be writing policy, not policies. You'll be writing Guardian orders or writing projects or writing programs, but not actually doing them.
And what would be an example of one of them?
How to implement a drug-free program in a country. How to research where an attack was coming from. How to ensure that Guardian Office people were getting adequate study. Many things. There were several, just as probably the Office of Special Affairs is now, there were separate bureaus handling different things: legal, public relations, intelligence and investigations, and security, things like that.
Interesting. So you mentioned a little bit about plants. Do you think some of them might have been PDH'd?
Don't know. I just have the opinion that I think, now, of all the stuff that I did read, including Snow White stuff that I read, I never saw anything that deliberately instructed people to violate the law. I'm not saying it didn't exist. I'm just saying I never read any. And I'm not arguing that it didn't exist. I'm just saying I didn't read any. I've read where it was said that Ron actually ordered illegal things to be done. I never saw any. Again, I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I'm just saying I never saw any. I have also read where people have said that so-and-so was actually a plant. It was obvious from the outset they were a plant, but nobody would do anything about it. And I've read that about 2 or 3 people, some of which were the people that were caught and were reasoned to crack open the church and get rid of the Guardian's office. Is that true? I have no idea. I can't argue one way or the other because I don't have firsthand facts. But based on what I've seen, somebody has sabotaged the church and they did a very good job at it.
Did you see the actual any Snow White policy by Mary Sue or Hubbard?
Well, Snow White was actually a program, and the idea was people are attacking the church, and we want to find where the attacks are coming from, and we want to get rid of that false information.
So did you see any actual policy saying for people to do dodgy things, basically, from Snow White?
Keep in mind, they weren't policies. They would have been lower level things. They would have been projects or programs. I never saw anything that instructed an illegal act to be done.
Okay. All right, yeah. Just wanted to clear
that. And again, as I said before, I wouldn't argue that there weren't any. I'm just saying I didn't see any. But if you look at the mind is full of false data, and that's why we're just talking about an individual's mind. That's why people do weird things. It's full of false data. You can extrapolate that onto governments and humanity. And one of the reasons why governments and people and organizations do crazy things is they're operating on false information. And the idea of Snow White was to find that false information that was either kept by Interpol or by governments and get rid of it, which is illogical enough. I don't see anything wrong with that. The question is whether you're going to do it in an illegal or immoral manner or criminal manner. That's where the issue arises.
Before Snow White got exposed, what was your idea of Snow White and what did you know about it?
I'm not sure when it got exposed. Keep in mind there was the raid on the church in 1977. When was that? June or July, I think. I went into the Guardian's office in February 77. And I knew nothing about Snow White before the raid. So I don't know at what point it became known by the government and in the press and everywhere else. So I can't really answer that because I don't know when that was. But it wasn't until long after I got to Worldwide that I even knew what Snow White was.
Okay, so, what was it like when the church got raided and you were involved with the church at the time? What tell me how you found out about it and what was the word going around?
It was later in 1977, I think June or July, but I won't swear to it. Do you know when the church got raided? I can't recall.
77, I think.
Yeah, but I don't know what month. Anyway, it would have been
either.
several months after I got there. The primary effect for me is the fact that I wasn't in Bureau 1, which was in the Information Bureau. I was in the Service Bureau, security officer handling the paper shuffling. But I also had under me physical security, which means the night watchman and stuff like that. And we increased our presence of people keeping an eye on the place. Because the Guardian's Office Worldwide was in the manor and the outlying buildings. But to be honest, there was no real effect because, first of all, just because there's 2 guys there instead of 1, if the police came knocking and they had a warrant, we couldn't stop them anyway. It didn't matter whether you had 1 person, 2 person, or 10 people. If they ever weren't, they'd come in anyhow. They never did, so it really had no effect.
And out of curiosity, how large was Saint Hill while you're there?
You mean the organization?
Yeah, well, how many people are on course? Because there's a whole Saint Hill size thing, which was the early 60s. So was it still Saint Hill size in the early 80s?
I didn't spend a lot of time up there, but I would say no. Of the number of people that I saw around, I wouldn't say so. I occasionally went up to the castle because the castle was further up the hill from where we were, uh, and there weren't as many people there when I was there as supposedly Old St. Hill had.
Were the course rooms still full, though?
Not when I went in it.
Okay. But it was kind of like a golden age of Scientology in the late 70s, but not necessarily at St. Hill.
I can't say because I didn't spend a lot of time up there. I'm not going to give my opinion because I didn't go up. For instance, I wouldn't have gone up there on evenings and weekends, which is when you would expect more people to be there. So I'm not a good person to ask. My awareness of the change in Scientology was from my experience of the attitude of San Diego org, because I was on staff there, of trying to do the right thing and make sure that students and pre-clears were getting the gains out of their training and their auditing, and seeing a very large mission in the San Diego area, which was called Adams Avenue, and seeing Stevens Creek mission when I was there of scores of people on course. So to me, the masses of people that you would see on course in the 70s is from that firsthand experience. I can't really say about St. Hill. I don't know what their numbers were while I was there because, as I said, I didn't spend much time up there.
Well, what were the staff member numbers like?
Couldn't tell you.
What about in just the Geo?
God, I don't know how many people we had. Many dozens is what I'd say at Guardian Office Worldwide.
30? 35?
I'd say, and this is totally off the top of my head, order of magnitude 100.
Okay, and what do you reckon? What do you reckon? I think I heard something about in the early 80s when the Geo got overthrown by Miscavige and his crew or something. I heard that with Mary Sue at the headquarters, I think in America, did they have 2,000 staff just in the Geo, or was that worldwide Geo?
I would say it's probably worldwide, but what I have heard, and once again, I wasn't there, my understanding was that Mary Sue and Jane Kember, who was the guardian at St. Hill, were both taken off post because of a forged communication from Ron. In other words, they were both presented with a forgery that said that you're removed from post from Ron, that was orchestrated by Miscavige. I've heard that. I don't know whether it's true, but knowing Miscavige and what I have heard about Miscavige, seems likely. I can't imagine that Ron and Mary Sue are going to go off post just because Miscavige would have said so. He would have had to have said that Ron says you're off post.
Yeah, and so you were in a Geo when this overthrow happened, right?
Yes.
In 82?
Yes.
What was it like?
A lot of people went out to the gardens. A lot of people were sent up to the castle. That's where you were sent to do manual labor.
So a lot of people refused to go along with the changes and so got sent to the RPF. Is that what you're saying?
Don't forget, a lot of the Guardians offers weren't even in the Sea Org, so they wouldn't go to the RPF. The Rehabilitation Project Force is a Sea Org phenomenon, not a church phenomenon. So a regular staff member in a church or in the Guardian's office that isn't Sea Org would not be going to the RPF. But they might be sent out to the gardens to do manual effort. They might say, you're off post. I was once sent out to do manual stuff. I wasn't RPF, but I was told to do manual work. And I remember I hesitate to call it a front-end loader, but I remember hauling many hundreds of kilos of cinder blocks a day for castle extension construction one time when I was sent out to do a lot of physical work.
Now, was that because they basically had a message? Like, I'm just wondering, what was it like the day when it suddenly all happened? Like, did they say to you, okay, you're getting shut down, go and move bricks? How did it happen?
I don't recall. And I wasn't necessarily there. I don't recall that event. I could have been somewhere else.
Okay,
I don't.
but after the big changes came in, what did they say to you in your post? Did they say, okay, you're now called Office of Special Affairs, or did they say you're now in some other division, or?
Because I was in the SEALG, I was actually sent to Flag Service Org.
Okay.
And I'm not even sure what day Mary Sue and Jane were taken off. That's something I have to look up sometime. Maybe it happened when I wasn't even there. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what day it happened. But late October, I was sent over, because I remember I was actually in the air on October 31st, flying to Flag Service Org.
What did a lot of the GO members think of these new changes?
Don't know, because I wasn't amongst them. I was on a plane.
But some of them did object to these changes and didn't want to go along with it.
There probably were, but I don't know.
Okay.
One thing I've never researched, and you've basically brought to a head, is for me to look back and identify exactly at what I was doing when in relation to when the removals were, because I don't recall a lot of events regarding that removal. As I said, on the 31st of October, I was on the plane to Clearwater or Tampa. And I don't recall a lot of that happening. You know what I mean?
What were you? Okay, what were you sent to Flag to do?
I was made part of the finance network. There was a guy called Wendell Reynolds who was made financial dictator, which is sort of a weird post, but that's what it was. And there was what was the name of that network? I can't remember the name of it right now. But there was a new finance network that was created, and I was put in that, and I was pretty much a gopher for that. I didn't have a high-level position.
Okay, and but when you went to Flag, you were no longer a part of the GO anymore. It was
correct.
Okay, so
I was part of the finance network.
Yeah, is that Division 3?
No, it wasn't within Flag Service Org. It was that new network that Wendell Reynolds was in charge of. I'd have to look at what the name is. I don't recall it right now.
Do you know anything about Lyman Spurlock?
Name sounds familiar, but I don't know who that person is.
I think he was head of GO at Flag or something like that, or in that area. What about, do you know anything good about Mead Emery? Mead Emery or something?
No, don't know that.
One of the tax attorneys or something?
Don't know that person.
Okay. What do you think about geopolitics? Because you've obviously read a lot of geopolicy, right?
Well, it wasn't policy, but guardian orders. Yeah, don't forget it's been a few decades, but okay.
Well, what about the stuff about attacking squirrels and taking down squirrel groups and stuff? And what do you know about that?
I wasn't intimately involved with that. Most of the stuff I've read since I left, and it seems pretty extreme.
Is it off policy for for Office of Special Affairs to be attacking indies? Do you think?
I think it's illegal in some of the things that they're doing, because I've seen some of the things that they're doing. I am aware of things covert things. I'm aware of the church false reporting to government authorities, trying to get people arrested, trying to get people detained on false premises. Lying.
Are you talking about independence?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Yeah. All right.
Yeah. I've known them trying to intercede when somebody is going to go on an airplane flight or go over an international border. I've known them trying to get them stopped by feeding false information to the government.
Was that in like the 90s or 80s or what?
No, we're talking about in the last several years. We're talking about recently.
Really? So is OSA
Oh,
still doing
oh
dirty
yeah,
tricks?
it's an
Yeah.
ongoing. The thing is, the dirt didn't stop with the GO. Regardless of whatever happened in the GO, it didn't stop just because the Guardian office was disbanded.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I mean, there's so many Scientology haters out there that are doing a good job of it. And what's the Office of Special Affairs doing picking on indies when there's bigger fish to fry? Like,
I agree with you. I agree with you. But the thing is my opinion. My opinion is that Miscavige actually deliberately creates bad press and a bad reputation for Scientology because it now becomes an aberrative word. Even people who are Scientologists, let me rephrase that. Even people who are on staff for many, many, many years and are no longer on staff say, I'm not a Scientologist. But yet they'll use Scientology in their everyday life. They don't even want to use the word. They don't want to describe themselves as Scientology because Miscavige has turned the term into poison. I've known situations where the church will even spread the news that an indie is a Scientologist to try to get a community against the indie. So that, you see what I'm saying? Is that
they're dirtying the name.
They use the bad name of Scientology against a person. But what's funny is the person that they try to poison the community against is a good person and hasn't done anything wrong. So the community looks at this third party by the church against this good person who's doing good things and say, so he's a Scientologist? We've heard it's bad, but he's a good guy. He's never done anything to me, so I'm not going to hassle him. You know, it's amazing, but that's what they do.
Yeah, it's interesting. So, but do you think it's off policy? Right. Well, I've read some secret. A lot of secret network orders, from the GEO, from the Office of Special Affairs, and a lot of it was talking about psychiatry and just how incredibly corrupt the world is and their sort of connection to the governments and stuff. But there was nothing about, hey, go and attack these squirrel people and bring down the squirrel groups. There was nothing about that.
Okay.
Have you seen anything?
So what are you asking me? I don't know.
Well, have you seen any policies that say it's okay to just bring down indies and attack squirrel Scientologists? And I mean, not saying that we are squirrels, but they think we're squirrels.
I haven't, but I don't know whether it exists. But here's my view: is we've got the creed of the Church of Scientology, and like it or not, and let's ignore the copyright and trademark issues and all that kind of rubbish. Let's ignore the legal issues for a moment and just look at the creed of the church. The creed of the church, if you look at the creed of the church, I'm not sure if I have one readily available, but if you look at the creed of the church, it actually says, let me see if I can find something here. But if you look at the creed of the church, it basically talks about the fact that somebody should have the ability to practice a religion as they wish. Do you have a copy of the creed there?
No.
I mean, aside from the fact that the creed of the church basically says that people should be able to practice their religion the way they wish, there's also international law and conventions. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights talks about it. Article 18, I think. What is it? Article 18? Talks about it. And the International, I have to read this because I can't ever remember the name. And the International Covenant on Civil Rights, Civil and Political Rights, Article 18 also talks about it. So the Creed, the UDHR, and the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights all basically support the fact that if somebody wants to hive off of the religion they've been a member of, whether it's a Protestant hiving off from Catholicism or whether it's a Scientologist hiving off from the church, if they're practicing their religion, which the church claims Scientology is a religion, I happen to agree with them. Why are they actually trying to prevent people from practicing Scientology as they want to practice it? It's contravention of the creed and those international conventions.
You were in the GO in the late 70s. Did you hear anything about Werner Erhard and Landmark EST Forum? Did you hear anything about that?
I didn't know.
Okay, because I think I heard that maybe the GO was doing some attacks on Landmark and Werner Erhard and all that.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah.
Once again, I don't have first-hand knowledge of it, but I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah. Well, this is my opinion of it. I mean, the world's really corrupt, and I think in order to run a church and all those sorts of things, maybe you might have had to have done some dodgy things in order to protect the church. Like if you got some really bad person who's being really bad PR for the church, maybe doing something to try and stop that person. But if you just got some people doing Landmark EST and doing, or some people doing even Squirrel Scientology, I don't know. I just don't agree with going out of your way to attack them, because it's just like, hey, there's bloody Chris Shelton, for example. Like, if you're gonna, he's actually directly attacking Scientology. And doing it successfully. He's doing it successfully, right? But, like, who cares about people doing Werner Erhard's EST Landmark thing, or Avatar, or some people actually doing just crappy squirrel technology like Scientology? Like, I don't know. It's just a stupid target to be picking on. You know what I mean?
I agree.
Anyway, I don't know.
The thing is the church has perverted its role. Its role is to actually help people gain abilities, get rid of inabilities, and train. And they don't do that. There's so many things that take them off their purpose. They milk people for ideal orgs without giving them exchange. They milk people for IAS, the International Association of Scientologists. That's not anywhere in policy. iHelp is not in policy. Solo not 6 months auditing checks are not in policy. There's so many things they do that are totally off policy. They've perverted the technology. They've perverted the policies. They've perverted the intent. They're not doing what they're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, it seems like they've perverted.
On attention.
And OSA, the Office of Special Affairs, it seems like they've perverted that a bit as well. Like they've twisted everything to be away from actually supporting Scientology.
The whole church has been perverted.
Yeah.
I had 3 epiphanies. I had 3 epiphanies through my evolution with the church and my relationship with the church. The first one was when I was on staff. As I mentioned, I went to Flag Service Org. I was put in the RPF, the Rehabilitation Project Force. I wasn't that much, and it was done illegally, in contravention to policy. But I thought, well, supposedly I'm going to get a lot of physical work, which I don't mind because physical work can be rehabilitative, and supposedly you get auditing. I'd been clear for a long time, and even though I was at St. Hill, I still never was put under OT levels. Maybe I'll get to do the OT levels before I do all the sick checks I have to do. It became clear to me that the RPF had no intention. There was no intention of rehabilitation in the RPF. So when I noticed that, I said, I'm out of here. And I asked to leave. I don't mind putting a lot of effort into the church. I didn't mind long hours and no pay or low pay. But I expected something back. And it was very clear that I wouldn't get it on the short term or the long term. So I said, I'm out of here. Then that became public. I moved from the U.S. to Australia about 1988. I developed my career as an engineer, but I also did what's called field staff member. I got people to do Scientology services. There are some that would just do selling and get people in. I tended to help people fix up their lives, and then as a result of that, they could afford the next step. Instead of going into tremendous debt, I actually improved their lives. So I produced good results. I got onto solo nuts in 1989, and through those, from 1988 to 1992, I was doing that. But in 1992, I had a problem with the church.
Now, hold on. Just before you get into that problem, you were going to the AO in Australia in the late 80s, right? In around 1990. Okay.
I did my OT1 through new OT5 at AO Anzo in Sydney.
And that was when it was kind of a new building, right?
No, it was in 1987. I did it when the AO was in the same building as Sydney Org.
Okay, when did it become the Glebe thing? I think it's Glebe, is it? When did it move to Glebe?
Yeah, Glebe, Greek Street. It moved to Greek Street in Glebe. They were there until earlier this year. I don't remember exactly when they moved, but it was after I did my OT5 because I remember...
in the early 90s then. So in the early 90s they moved.
I don't recall when they moved. But in late 87 they had not yet moved.
Okay, well, how busy was the AO when you were involved in the early 90s then?
Pretty busy.
How many people would be in the course room?
Don't know. I didn't spend a lot of time in the course room.
Well, how many people, was it, I don't know, wasn't quiet or anything, no?
No, it wasn't quiet, but it wasn't crowded. I never saw as many people on course at the AO as I saw at Stevens Creek.
Okay. Yeah.
Definitely.
All right. Okay. Well, you can go on what you were saying. How in 1992.
And keep in mind, the AO is delivering a lot more courses. They're delivering a lot more courses than Stevens Creek could ever deliver.
Yeah. And the AO is for a whole area, not just a local area. Yeah. But you were saying you had an epiphany in 1992.
Yeah. Basically, what had happened is this was my second epiphany. I had married someone, and I paid for her OT 4, 5, 6, and 7, and she went over to Clearwater and did them. And I needed her to start working, and she didn't. And she basically lied about me, and the church started attacking me. And I basically had to go over there to defend myself. And I had my second epiphany. The first being when I decided that the church wasn't going to make sure that I got adequate auditing while I was on staff and take care of me. My second epiphany was basically after being basically productive, helping the church, and them attacking me based on falsehoods, I came to the realization that the church does not have the moral standing nor the competence to make any judgment about my ethics or justice, because they had already demonstrated multiple times their inability to administer justice or ethics. And when I had that realization, I basically went in and pounded on the ethics officer's desk, the guy who was handling me, yelled the facts at the top of my lungs and said, "You either declare me a suppressive person or you resolve it right now." And when he investigated what I said, he'd already known the facts. It's just he didn't get it. He didn't get the fact that I wasn't going to stand for it. And he really, I don't know why he didn't. He wasn't a bad guy. He just, for some reason, even though I was stating the facts, he wasn't acting on them. And I basically just backed him into a corner. This is the end, you know? You either resolve this correctly. So that was my second epiphany in 1992. So after that, whatever the church had to say, I pretty much considered they had no standing or credibility in regards to ethics or justice for anyone.
Okay, can I say a comment that's a typical sort of Scientology sort of hater comment and like a critical comment, but I'm interested in your answer. They'll say something like, look, if Scientology's got such good tech and increases your communication, that sort of stuff, why is you and this ethics officer having a communication problem, and why is you and I guess it's your ex-wife having a communication problem? Isn't that proof that the tech doesn't work?
I wouldn't say so. I would say it's proof that it's not being used.
Okay.
That's my answer. Short and sweet.
All right.
But the thing is somebody doesn't have to be a Scientologist to have good communication. There are good tools, and it's codified, and you can teach somebody those skills. But there are many paths to good communication. I mean, I'm married to a woman now who's not a Scientologist, and we have excellent communication. I have better communication with her than I've had with anybody, but she's not a Scientologist.
So in this situation back in the early 90s, people, the ethics officer and your ex-wife weren't applying their communication.
Well, no. In the case of my ex-wife, there was an ethics situation. I'm not going to try to make a judgment of exactly what it was, but she basically originally said that she would move to Australia and live with me there. She then decided when she was done doing her classes at Clearwater she didn't want to, and she wouldn't communicate with me. And instead of being responsible and say, I really appreciate you paying for these, I'm going to pay them off, or I'm going to help you pay them off, which is really all that I asked, that we would do it together even if we weren't going to stay together. She was unwilling to do that. So I don't think it was a communication issue. I think it was a responsibility issue.
But what was the ethics officer doing wrong at the time?
Well, he was listening to her bullshit. But the problem is even though he had training as an ethics officer, he doesn't necessarily have the ability to differentiate fact from fiction. I mean, that is a high-level skill. When you're given two sets of facts that apparently are contrary, you need to be able to evaluate them, and he didn't know how to do that. Simple as that. I don't think he had bad intent. I think he just was not competent enough.
I think what I'm talking about is why there is, I guess, drama amongst church members. I think that's what I'm trying to work out. Well, because when I was involved,
I agree with you.
I mean, when I was involved with the church, I'll tell you what I saw. Two girls who were sort of business partners, and then they had a falling out. That was a little bit of a drama, and they went, I think, into no communication. I mean, that's a bit of an out point. Like, why the hell did that happen? You know.
No.
I mean, my opinion is that if they weren't Scientologists, I mean, these sorts of things happen to people who are not Scientologists all the time, right? And it probably happens, I guess, maybe less amongst Scientologists. But I think that people just think because you're a Scientologist, you shouldn't have any problems at all, or something.
Well, that's sort of an odd viewpoint, but the problem is even though probably the first course that most people have in Scientology is communications, they don't necessarily apply it. There are people who are highly trained and have done a lot of services in terms of auditing, including OT levels, who still won't communicate. There's many people that are ex-church that are also trained and processed that won't communicate for all sorts of reasons. That's one of the big problems of the ex-church community, is they won't communicate with each other. You think slightly differently from the way I do, I'm not going to talk to you. I'll talk to anybody, even if they disagree with me. But I've run into plenty of people. There's a guy in Melbourne who won't talk to me because I'm related to Orangeland. There's a guy in Sydney who is upset with me for various reasons and doesn't communicate. But that's their privilege, you know? It's like they make their decisions. I don't think that should be the case. I think we should work together more. I think it just works to our detriment, the fact that we don't. But it is the way it is.
Do you think the church comes between relationships amongst members and screws things up? Like this situation you're talking about you had in the early 90s. Do you think that was where it was coming? The church was getting involved in stuff and just causing problems, whereas they should have just stayed out of it?
With my wife and I, no. They didn't cause it. She caused it.
And what did they do to cause problems then?
They didn't help it. They could have helped it. They didn't help. Their lack of competence exacerbated it, made it worse, but they didn't cause it.
Do you think they were just trying to get as much money off her or you, and that was basically, and then they caused a problem between you and her by just getting as much money for auditing as, and that caused
I
a problem?
I think it was in that case it was just incompetence. I don't think there was bad intent by that ethics officer. I think, but
No, but the reg before this all happened, it could have been caused by the reg from milking money really heavily.
I don't think so.
No?
I don't think so. No, there's much bigger issues, and I don't think that was the case. But the thing is the church also gets to be dictatorial and not applying standard Scientology. That's the problem. The church does not apply Scientology. We keep talking about Scientology. I'm sorry, the church does not apply Scientology. That became very clear in my declare, because my declare, the fundamental primary reason for my declare as a suppressive person, which for those of you who don't know Scientology terms, it means you're evil, is the fact that I had a business dispute with someone. He and I both have owned a business. It lost money. We closed the business. I paid the debts. He owed me half. He refused to pay. And I, per the policy, wrote to a person called the International Justice Chief, as I'm supposed to make him aware of that situation. And I had to get a reply per the policy before I could sue him. I did that. That person said, I disapprove your request for suing. And I wrote him back and said, number one, thank you for the reply. That's all I need in policy. Number two, I never asked for your permission. I don't need your permission. It would be a subversion of civil law if I needed your permission. And by the way, here's a cramming order, so you better understand Ron's policy. So I crammed the International Justice Chief, basically. I was not a popular person after that. Anyway, but there is something in black and white, very clear, doesn't need interpretation, that the church doesn't apply. They used that. We have a very persistent fly. The church used that as the biggest fundamental premise for kicking me out of the church, because I pursued it. And I told them, no, you are applying policy. He's the one who's being out lacking in ethics. You should be handling him, not me. But here's another thing. There were so many lies and distortions in that declare. That's firsthand knowledge of the church blatantly lying and misleading. That when I hear stories about what the church has done that other people allege, I have no firsthand knowledge of those allegations of children being ignored who were injured, or child trafficking, or physical abuse. But my view is, if I have, from my experience, the church lies, firsthand experience. So if I've got the church saying one thing and another person saying another, my tendency is to say, unless I've got evidence otherwise, I'm going to believe this other person, because I know from experience, personal experience, the church lies and distorts.
How did they lie? Like, give me one example.
They alleged that I had sued other people, which was false and or irrelevant. Example. First of all, the law, the policy talks about civil suits. A civil suit is not a divorce, and it's not something in a family court. One of the things was about me suing my ex-wife. This is the one in 1992. I never sued her in civil court for the money. We had a divorce. And yes, I was the person who filed for the divorce. But the interesting thing about that divorce is, she and I agreed between ourselves that we wouldn't get back together, at least on the short term. I would go back to Australia and she would go back to Los Angeles, which is where she was from, and we wouldn't file for a divorce. The case supervisor said, no, I'm not going to allow that to continue. You need to file for divorce. So not only is this datum stated in my declare, supposedly me suing her, it's irrelevant because it's not a civil suit. And number two, we were instructed to file it in the first place by the case supervisor. So there's just one example. I could go through the whole thing because I did an analysis of a whole bunch of lies in there and distortions.
Why do you think they put lies and distortions in it?
I have no idea. They
Do you
don't
think
follow
it's
Scientology? They don't apply Scientology?
do you think it's just that they wanted to have reasons to declare you?
I have no idea. I don't know what's going on in their head. All I know is they weren't applying Scientology.
Did
The
they
whole, yep,
did they not like the idea of one Scientologist suing another Scientologist because it might get into the media and create bad PR?
I doubt it. Why would it get into the media? Why would the media even be concerned about two Scientologists suing each other?
And why would it come up in the law case anything to do with Scientology anyway?
In the suit, it didn't.
Exactly.
But that's irrelevant. It's irrelevant. The fundamental problem is the church did not apply its own policies.
I know
It
it's
can't.
just bizarre, but it's bizarre from their point of view.
But
What? Who
when you
cares?
start to understand what Miscavige has done to the church, I mean, this is a guy who's was uneducated, untrained, unprocessed. He's basically a messenger boy, and he takes over the church. And people let him take
Didn't he
over
get
the church.
trained as like a class 4 auditor or something in the 70s, didn't he?
But how much training is that compared to class 12s? He's removing people from posts who have decades of experience.
Yeah.
As far as I'm concerned, just because he's done a class 4 course, that's not highly trained.
Yeah, I mean, you should be, it's, the whole thing's
I mean,
weird.
the only thing he's good at is being a thug.
I'm pretty sure this is the second time I've heard of a situation where the church and their ethics officers or whatever have gone involved in situations that have nothing to do with them, and then they try and declare someone, and it's just like, what the hell are they talking about? Like, you know, you sue another Scientologist, it has nothing to do with the church, and it's not going to cause bad PR. Like, the only way it could be bad PR is maybe if it's like Tom Cruise suing Kirstie Alley.
Even then, it doesn't matter. Let me read you because this is one of my, as I said, this is a document I'm very proud of.
SP Declare.
That's by declare, yes. There is a policy that says you're guilty of a suppressive act by bringing a civil suit against any Scientology organization or Scientologist, including the non-payment of bills or failure to refund, without first calling the matter to the attention of the International Justice Chief and receiving a reply. Now, whether you argue that's a good policy or not, that's the policy. I'm not going to argue whether it's good or not. The point that I'm making is they can't even apply understand that simple concept.
Yeah. Because you did inform the International Justice Chief, didn't you?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But we're coming up to my third epiphany. Afterwards, when I received it, I basically wrote up, because I have done what's called the Data Evaluators course, so I know the data series. I wrote an analysis of my suppressive declare that highlighted all of the outpoints, all the wrong and the categorically wrong and implied wrong things about it, inaccurate things about it. And I basically said, on the face of it, it's very clear for anybody that looks at these documents that it should never have been issued. Cancel. I sent that to the Executive Director International, and I sent it to Religious Technology Center people. I didn't bother with the International Justice Chief because he's the person who issued it in the first place. And it wasn't handled. I was offered a committee of evidence if I flew to Los Angeles, and I said, first of all, you've already proven that you can't arbitrate or pass justice. I've already realized that years ago by a demonstration of your activities. If you want to have a comment, feel free. You've got all the data in the binder. Oh, but we need your president. I said, you pay for the air ticket? I'm going to be losing a lot more money by being off work than you're going to spend on the air ticket. You cause the problem, you pay for the air ticket, or else we do it over Skype. Or whatever, maybe Skype didn't exist then, but we do it on an audio-visual thing, over the internet. And they refused. But the fact that because of their behavior, I started to look at what the church was on about, and I read about what they did in 1982 and 83, basically destroying the mission network. I learned about a lot of the things that they've been up to that I didn't even know about, even though I was on lines. And I basically had my third epiphany, and that epiphany was I had trouble with the church for many years, and I always attribute it to incompetence or lack of training by people at the bottom. I basically realized that the church was not rotten to the core, to use the expression. They were rotten from the core. It was deliberate.
Yeah.
It's not just isolated situations.
Yeah.
The whole church was rotten. They altered the tech.
Yeah. At the
They
top.
altered the admin.
Yeah.
They altered the intention of both.
Yeah. RTC.
Because when flag service or Canadian follows simple policies and bulletins about solo knots and deliberately violate them, and you would think that these people would know what Elliot said. It was so clearly a violation of their own technology. It's deliberate. They're sabotaging it. There's no doubt about it in my mind.
Okay, now, what do you think about David Miscavige then? Do you think he's intentionally ruining Scientology, or that he's just aberrated and that's how aberrated people run churches? Like, does he hate Scientology?
Too. You can't separate them. I think it's both.
Do you think he hates Scientology?
I don't think he knows what Scientology is.
Do you think he's a plant?
No. Don't care. Whether he's a plant or whether he's convenient. The thing is there's rumors that the church is now run by the U.S. government because of the way the ownership of the trademarks are and all that kind of stuff. Don't know whether that's true or not. The thing is whether it is or not, he was convenient. They don't need to destroy it because he's destroying it for them. I'm amazed that he managed to take control and keep control. He might have had help. Like I said, he was just a messenger boy. Why didn't these people of responsibility say, no, I'm not going to go off post. Everybody's put me on for, a lifetime appointment. How can Wendell Reynolds and I forget the name of the French guy who was commanding officer EU and then EDINT, or how can somebody like Heber Jentz actually buckle under this guy? I don't understand it. It confounds me.
Captain Bill talks a bit, I think, about plants getting sent in and people have been PDH'd, sent into the church to take it over and stuff. And maybe they're associated with the government or something. Do you believe that? That the church was like taken over by bad guys and stolen?
How many? I don't know. But there's a bad guy running it.
Yeah.
How much help he had? I don't know. I think some of the events of 1977 were instigated by plants, but that's an opinion. I don't have evidence. It's just an opinion. As I said, I don't have enough data to try to convince others. It's just, it went off the rails too completely and too quickly.
Well, Captain Bill, he has have you read the debrief by Captain Bill or something? That's like a few thousand words in it, and he talks about Quinton Hubbard being assassinated, and it's really, when I first read it, I was like, oh wow, I don't know if I can believe this right, but I've looked into more stuff. This was about a year ago I first looked into it, and now a year after really looking into all this sort of stuff and finding out what's going on in the world, I believe Captain Bill in what he's saying in that debrief. Like, I really believe it is that epic what went on, because in the debrief he talks about his experience in the church and what happened in those last 10 years or whatever. Do you believe Captain Bill in that debrief, basically?
I neither believe him or disbelieve him. As I said earlier, there's a lot of things that in the way I think, will have as data and not believe or disbelieve. It could be true or it could be not true. I don't know whether it's true. Does it matter whether Quinton Hubbard was assassinated or not? Not really in the big scheme of things. Don't know.
There was
Sorry to give you no answer, but yeah, that's
there was something in here in Captain Bill's debrief where he mentioned how somebody, I think, had been PhD'd and they were running around in the water or naked or something like that. And then, I heard some of the story coming from a completely other source, from some Scientologist or something, mentioning PhD, PDH, and something, the same thing. And I was like, my God, this backs up what Captain Bill was saying. But time and time again, I see evidence to back up, what he was talking about in that debrief. Because I'm just saying, because if you get someone like Chris Shelton to read, I know I talk about him a lot, but he's a good person to use it because he's a classic, I guess, Scientology hater, ex-Scientologist. If you get him to read the debrief, he'll just go, Captain Bill's another, this is just not true, right? Because it's so epic to believe that the world is that corrupt, that this sort of shit goes down on planet Earth. Like Kennedy was assassinated. Because the stuff that's going down is just so epic. You know what I mean? People can't believe it. But if you really investigate and really look into it, this sort of stuff is real.
But the thing is for him to say it's true, for him to be, this is not true, how does he know it's not true?
Exactly.
I'm not sitting here saying it is true. It's like, there's so many people that accept things or propound things that they really have no data. They're doing it because somebody else says it. Maybe somebody in authority, or maybe somebody they consider as an authority. I mean, the whole climate change cause scenario, yeah, there's always been climate change, but do we really know what causes it? There's so many people that they'll go, yeah, humans cause climate change. And how do you know that? Because blah, 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 blah. Are you sure? No. Or blah, 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 blah. Are you sure of that too? Where did you get that information? You know what I mean? They'll come to a conclusion because they think, or because it's from a reliable source or whatever. So to me, as I said, I think a little bit differently. I might have some data. I may not have it aligned. I may not have a confirmation, but I'll think the probability. Like, is it abuse by the church? I'm not going to say if person A says the church did blah, blah, that it's true. I wasn't there. But as I said, I have a tendency. I know the church's behavior. I'm not going to say it's true. I'll say so-and-so said it was true. I have a tendency to more believe him than the church, but that still doesn't make it true. Same thing with Captain Bill. Is it true? Is it not? Don't know. There's PDHs. We know from what's been revealed of what the U.S. government was up to that they were doing research on how to control people, using pain, using drug, using hypnosis. We already know that. Ron was talking about that decades ago. Yeah. We now know that he was ahead of his time knowing about that stuff.
He was so ahead of his time, yeah.
Whether it's true in regards to the church, don't know. Wasn't there. I'm not saying it wasn't. But it's not impossible.
Yeah. But it's just what is going on is just amazing. Like people, there's evidence that there's like underground bases in America where people are getting PDH, getting brainwashed and with experiments and just crazy stuff. There's good evidence suggesting this is happening, but you just get people. What I'm saying is there's such a big gap between what's really going on and what the average person who's had all this information hidden from them believes. And so they go along and they hear a story by Captain Bill and they go, that's too wide. Or they hear a story from Peter Moon, like about a Montauk secret underground base, and they go, that's too wild. And they go, no, that's not true. But they just need to go, no, just open up your mind. This sort of shit is really possible and probably is going on.
If you're talking about the U.S., you don't need to have underground bases. There are people who are not Scientologists who are making it very clear that the U.S. population has increasingly been dumbed down adequately so they'll believe anything.
Yeah.
They can't even think right. And these are not Scientologists who aren't, as I said, there's all sorts of knowledge and wisdom in the world that isn't necessarily related to Ron and Scientology. And there are people that see this that aren't even Scientologists. My assertion is, after you're getting on Excalibur, you're more likely to be able to see some of this stuff because you're tending to see some causes that you don't know otherwise. And I would say that even the people that are non-Scientologists don't necessarily see causes, but they see the effects and they see what's going on. You don't need to have PDH dungeons to make people come to stupid conclusions. They do it already.
No. I'm not saying the PDH. No, I'm not saying people are dumb because they've been PDH, but I'm saying I'm just saying that incredible shit's going on, and people are
Yeah, I
just
know,
are
but I'm
not
saying
believing
it's
it.
happening in broad. I'm saying it's happening in broad daylight. You don't need to drag them down into a dungeon to do it.
Oh, yeah, exactly, yeah. Like, I mean, let's go into. I mean, you can talk about the whole vaccine thing. It's like, what the hell is that? It's so epic and wild. It's
Yeah,
so epic, and people can't confront. Chris Shelton cannot confront that maybe all these parents who are saying their kids got harmed by the vaccine aren't making it up. He can't handle that the whole
I
medical
understand.
industry, that all these doctors have been sucked in to go along with all these vaccines, and it could be all bullshit. He can't handle that. It's just
I
like,
agree. I agree.
and that's why we. That's
Because
why.
well, you have to ask yourself, and as I said, there's plenty of people outside Scientology who say this as well. If the vaccines are so good, why do they need so much government protection? If Monsanto is so good, why do they need so much government protection? Why can't they make their data available to everyone for objective evaluation? Why do they need so much protection if they're so good?
Yeah,
You have to ask yourself.
yeah,
And I'm not asserting one way or the other, but I just question when somebody hides the data and hides the truth, what's going on? Because it's classic aberration. It's classic, the kind of thing we're trying to handle in Scientology, not just by the individual, but by the whole society. That's the purpose of us doing this stuff. Unfortunately, the church gets bogged down into building stupid buildings and having wars. Boy, that happens a lot. How many organizations do you know that go off track that have wars? I think we can name a few.
yeah.
Not just the Church of
Exactly. Well, the
Scientology.
big thing is if you look at the Church of Scientology, that whole thing seemed to have got infiltrated and corrupted. Now, do you think that doesn't happen to the U.S. government? Do you think it doesn't happen to the Irish government? It's the exact same thing. And if you look at the policies that they follow, the way they go about taking over things and going there and making it do whatever they want, it's just, I don't know. I just feel it's just like interesting how some people, I guess, they have a bad experience with the church, they've left, and they didn't do what I did, but they went on another path in that they just thought that Scientology was crap and corrupted. They didn't really keep on investigating. Where's the corruption coming from? Why are these organizations getting screwed up?
There's so many people that I've met that have trained and have spoken to that are trained as highly experienced auditors and case supervisors and have been in those roles for years that never get auditing themselves. And then they get out and they don't want to have a bar of it. They've seen people get gains. Some of them will deny that, and some won't, but they don't want to do it anymore.
I know.
I think it's deliberate. The most dedicated, the most promising, the most able people are actually sabotaged, and they're not interested anymore.
Because the church just milks them for all they got and use them for as many hours as possible, and then they leave, and then that's it.
Yeah. And they never get a chance. There are some people like me who wouldn't stand for it and would leave staff like I did.
Yeah.
And then there are some people who have the courage to say, no, get stuffed. And there are some people that don't.
Yeah.
What can I say?
And I guess that they just went, because they didn't get enough processing themselves, they didn't get all this case handled, so that when they left, they weren't able to confront the situation and find out the truth about what really went on.
It might be auditing, it might be training, it might be TRs. Don't know. I'm not going to evaluate it's going to be different things for different people.
Well, I think I just think it is a big thing to do with case being able to confront the truth, and so you can when you've had a lot of case, because I got to do a lot of processing while I was involved with the church, so I had that big benefit. Whereas if I had somebody who just joined and was auditing people and got really worked into the ground, I could have left, and then I wouldn't have been able to have this a high awareness and ability to see what was wrong with the church, and I might have just left and said, "Oh, Scientology's crap. They just rip you off, and that's it." You know what I mean?
But you're saying that you increase your confront by getting more auditing. If somebody came up to you and said, "How am I going to increase my confront?" What would you say? Get more auditing? I wouldn't.
I would say both. I'd say
TRs.
I'd say do TRs, but also auditing and all that sort of stuff. Case gain.
Oh, it's good.
Puts you in a great shape so that you then can then find out, like that's, I guess, what it did with me. You can find out what's going on in the church, whereas other people, they're too keyed in when they leave because they didn't do much processing, that they couldn't work out what was going on in the church.
Yeah. It might be different for different people, but I think you need the whole package, all three of them. Because I had a situation. One thing we didn't discuss, we sort of glossed through that decade, is in 1997, I went for the Golden Age of Tech Solar Knots course. It's a nice marketing name. In my view, Golden Age of Tech was actually to sabotage the tech, to basically tell all the auditors that were trained auditing with no difficulty, you have to retrain, sabotage your entire field of auditors. When I got into that course, I already saw problems right off the bat. Number one, somewhere there was a reference that basically said, the drills you're going to use are equivalent to LRAs. My first thought was, bullshit. LRAs didn't write them, it can't be equivalent to LRAs. Second thing is, I'm an engineer. I design complex systems. I know that even when you're doing something simple, sometimes you don't communicate it perfectly the first time. So it's good to version things. Even LRH's bulletins and policies had a versioning system. You know, we'd start with a date and then put an R and then an RA and an RB, etc. The Golden Age of Tech stuff didn't have any versioning. So immediately when I walked into the course room and saw those two things, I said, oh, bad vibe. And it wasn't too long until I saw something that was wrong. And I basically got the reference, showed the course supervisor, and the course supervisor said, no, do what the drill says. I said, no, that's not what LRH says. I'm going to do what that is. They sent me to Qualifications Division, to get crammed. Qualifications Division, even though I did the same thing of here's the drill and here's what Ron says, see how they're not the same, they sent me to ethics. The ethics guy, I think it might have even been the same guy that I was working with in 92, took me straight back to course and said, how am I going to apply ethics to a guy who insists on doing LRH? I can't do that. And they just put me on course. Okay?
So did they let you do what was standard tech then? Did they let you have your own way?
In that instance, yeah. But the point that I'm making here, and by the way, it happened again, and then they just left me alone because they knew it's going to keep happening. But the problem is I wasted a couple of days each time. But basically...
Now, hold on. The thing that in the Golden Age of Tech thing that you were reading, that you're saying that you're implying that wasn't even written by LRH.
Golden Age of Tech, the Golden Age of Tech drills were not written by LRH. He was dead.
Where'd they get them from?
They wrote them.
Okay.
Golden Age of Tech came out in the mid-90s. The bright idea, I understand, because the fundamental principle was LRH's, bulletins, this is as I recall, because we're talking about something I did 20 years ago. One of the fundamental ideas is LRH's information about any particular subject is in many bulletins and strewn all around, right? And the Golden Age of Tech is going to consolidate them into one place and tell you how to do something seamlessly. As a fundamental idea, I can dig that. Just like the fundamental idea of rehabilitation of project force is you get some physical work and you do some auditing. Both of them are very therapeutic. It's a good idea. But the problem is the intention behind it is more important than what you're doing. You know, I've come to realize in my old age, what you do is not as important as how you do it or why you do it. Anyway, they basically left me alone, and I did it the way LRH said after I was sent to ethics twice. But the point that I'm making is I had the courage and the understanding, the adequate understanding of the tech to say that's not right. How many people have that? Both the knowledge and the courage. Not a lot of people. I had read all the levels and the Dianetic stuff when I was in San Diego Org. I had been around for, by that time, almost over 20 years. Even though I wasn't a trained auditor, I'd still read the stuff multiple times. I knew the stuff well, but most people wouldn't have that courage, and most people wouldn't know the tech well enough to say, no, that's not parallel age. He says something different.
Can you say exactly what this point is?
I can't remember. We're talking about 20 years ago. There was
Okay.
more than one.
Was it kind of
Yeah,
like a policy, maybe not as exaggerated as this, but don't act your PC, and then the thing in Golden Age of Tech it said act your PC, and it was just contradicting, like that
there
obvious.
was a contradiction. It was contradiction. There was a bulletin that said one thing, and the Golden Age of Tech steps said another. And I
Yeah.
said, no, this isn't the way it is. And I really don't remember what they are. There were several. I only remember it happening twice that I was sent to ethics and qual and ethics, whatever. And then they just left me alone, and I finished the course. They probably wanted to get me out of there so I didn't poison any other minds. But yeah, but I recall that it wasn't, and my view of golden age of tech, and I've heard all sorts of excuses. I mean, one of the excuses that someone had when they were doing something unethical was, oh, now that there's golden age of tech, I understand for study, I understand the ethics conditions better. My response was, that's a load of crap. They were the same. They are the same. They haven't changed. There's no great revelation. Your responsibility isn't mitigated because now you've done the golden age of tech course. You were as responsible then as you are now. So don't give me a load of bullshit. But there you go. It's an excuse. And it's not golden age, as we've said. It's not. It basically destroyed the auditor base.
Yeah, GAT1 looked like it was horrific. I mean, this is something you could answer. When you're involved with the AO in the early 90s and then after GAT1, just out of curiosity, how many people were saying, oh, I'm clear? Like, how many people were, getting
I wasn't on
completing
those
things?
lines, so I don't know. I wasn't on the CS line, so I don't know.
Well, all I know is when I first got involved in 2010 in Melbourne, I mean, the golden age of tech was fully in and been in for over 10 years, and the effect of it meant that, like, there was barely anyone completing anything. And it was just...
But that's the idea. The LRAs talked about producing competent auditors quickly. I suggest that if you notice that the church doesn't really reveal the statistics of what they produce. I reckon if they really said how many auditors are we producing and how many clears and how many OTs, you'd find that they're not very high and they're going down over the long term. That's my opinion. They talk about how they're growing. I doubt it.
Well, I think it reached its low probably around 2010 or 11 or something.
Why do you think it's going up? I'm not saying it isn't. I'm not there.
Well, I know. Well, Taiwan. I think there's the Taiwan and the Russian orgs are apparently kind of booming.
Russian church orgs?
Yeah, the church ones. Yeah, apparently it's kind of popular over there. But that's what I think. I think in the dwindling spiral of the church, I think it probably was at its lowest in 2013 or something.
Okay. I have no opinion because I have no facts.
Yeah. And but also I've seen evidence that GAT2 have been an improvement on things. But anyway,
I haven't read it.
Yeah.
So I don't have a comment.
So, what did it feel like when you got declared?
Well, it was sort of weird because what was happening is I was going through a separation with my daughter's mother, and the church came over. The church called and came over. 3 people came over. One of them was the Continental Justice Chief, on the pretense that my daughter's mother and I, don't call her an ex because we weren't married. My daughter's mother and I were having a family court case on that Friday, and they come over, I think it was a Tuesday night, and said, we want you to sign some documents to protect the church, which in my view was a bunch of bullshit, because what does the church have to do with a separation of a couple anyway? But really what they did is they gave me a document that I altered significantly because I wasn't willing to sign it the way they gave it to me. And then as soon as I signed it, they gave me my declare. So they lied when they came over. it was a bit of a shock, but
So hold on. So they tricked in a trick way. They gave you to declare in a trick way.
yeah, not that that matters much. In the scheme of things, that doesn't matter much. But the more interesting events out of that whole evolution was that my daughter's mother disappeared with my daughter the next day. And then 2 days after that, when I was at the family court to get at a time that we already had scheduled and was attempting to get time with my daughter because she had disappeared, the house that I was living in was emptied of all furniture except for a mattress, and almost all my possessions disappeared. So they basically emptied the house when I was at court. And
why?
I'm almost certain that was based on the instigation of the church. At least the disappearance of my daughter and her mother, because later in the afternoon after I was declared, the Continental Justice Chief phoned me and said that my daughter's mother and my daughter won't be home because their car broke down and they're staying with a friend. And I basically just said, don't lie to me. I know you're meddling in my family's business. I know that she's leaving because of you, so don't give me a load of bullshit.
Why did they take your furniture, though?
They didn't. I'm saying it was empty. In other words, my daughter's mother did that. And I'm basically saying this whole scenario was on their instigation, in my opinion.
So she wanted furniture for something.
Oh, of course, wherever she was moving, and that I can understand. But the thing is the point that I'm making is, considering she was financially dependent on me and I was paying for all the rent and the food and everything else, even though we were separating and had been separated for something like 7 months, unless they pressured her to move out, she wouldn't have done so.
Okay. Did she take some of the stuff that just clearly didn't belong to her at all, like your private stuff, or?
I think maybe the filing cabinet was left. I don't remember the list, but we had made a list of what we agreed we would separate, like you get this table and I get these chairs or whatever, and we had a list that we agreed on, and that was significantly violated. But that's not important in the scheme of things. The important thing is she disappeared with my daughter on their instigation. I'm almost certain of that. I can't prove it, but I'm almost certain of that. But the fact that the Continental Justice Chief is phoning me up to say that she's not coming home, who would do that? I mean, he should have no knowledge of that. It shouldn't even be on his radar. But it's pretty clear that he was instigating it, or the church was instigating it. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been in the loop. He basically said, you're not to communicate to him, I will phone him. Because otherwise, she would have phoned me and said, I can't make it home, the car broke down. And she didn't. But it's bollocks.
Were they misapplying the, a disconnection policy? Because I heard LAH cancelled it years ago.
What do you think? It's pretty obvious.
Yeah, so they were applying disconnections. They were actually applying it, in this case, an actual policy, but it was one that had been cancelled long ago and shouldn't have been applied.
No disagreement.
Yeah, because it seems like, anyway, it's just,
But we've already discussed that the church doesn't apply policy anyway.
You could go on Leah Remini's show and start crying and go, oh, they took my daughter and my wife. And
Anyway, but the thing is she didn't show up at that family court hearing because she was too busy emptying the house, and I got my daughter, which for a certain amount of time, not as much as I should have, but I got my daughter for a certain amount of time, and that pissed her off. But anyway. But the thing is that's not important. The schema, in the scheme of things, that's not really important. The important thing is that the church doesn't apply Scientology. Hasn't for a long time.
Mm. On a different topic, in these times, I don't know if we call it the teens. I wouldn't call it the 2000s. I think the 2000s would be from year 2000 to 2010. But I don't know, the teens or something.
They're usually called the aughts. I've heard 2000, 2010 called the aughts.
What would you call these times then?
I don't know. I don't.
Well, it's annoying because it would be good when we get into the 20s because we can say 20s. But It's this whole thing about discrimination and like political correctness and stuff is going wild. But if you're a Christian or a Scientologist, you can sort of get picked on and just bagged, basically. And Scientologists can get attacked a little bit. What do you think of that? Like how to handle discrimination if you're a Scientologist?
Um, I've actually been discriminated more by the church than anybody else. So I've had very little by. I even had one situation where I forget what the context was, but there was some kind of relationship. It wasn't a business relationship or a society. I can't remember what it was, but there was some kind of a relationship about 15 years ago where somebody said to me, "Well, how do we know that we can trust you and you're credible and that kind of thing?" And I basically said, "Well, let's see. I'm a Scientologist," and he says, "And you consider that credible?" And I said, "But the Church of Scientology says that I'm an evil person." And he says, "Now that's a good one." So I actually had a situation where it was a positive that I had been a Scientologist and declared by the Church of Scientology. So I've had very little problem being a Scientologist. As I said, I've had more problems caused by the church than anybody. I once had an organization that did a security interview that was considered I was a Scientologist, but when I basically said to them, "Look," this was after my 1992 epiphany, it was in the 90s, so I really had no respect for the church's ethics and justice anyway. I basically said, if the church asked me questions about what I'm doing here, which they wouldn't, because when you're in counseling, you're worried about transgressions of what you do, not what you're working on. I would basically say the same thing to the church as I would say to you if you asked me about what I did on their confidential levels. And he says, "What's that?" I'd say, "Get stuffed." I'd say, "You can fire me if you like," or I'd say to the church, "You can kick me out if you like, but I'm not going to tell you." And he says, "Well, if that's your attitude, then I can trust you." So
Cool.
I've really had. I don't go blazoning on the, say I'm a Scientologist. What do you think of that? Because it's not in the context of most discussions. But I've really had very little issues.
Yeah. Now we're coming towards the end of the interview, and I kind of just want some sort of quick answers on this.
Okay?
So we're talking about Captain Bill and the OT levels, and you're saying how you do the actual you listen to LRH lectures and stuff at Bronzorg and that.
Oh yeah, as I said, there's more LRH on the Excalibur course than there is on the Solo Nuts course.
So I'm just interested. Did Captain Bill sort of steal these OT levels? Was he one of those people who dressed up and went into the Copenhagen AO or something like that? And
No.
I don't actually think he was, but I'm just sort of wondering how he managed to get these secret locked up OT levels.
I have no idea.
Yeah.
No idea at all.
All right. Okay. Riverside mission was the biggest mission in the world, wasn't it?
Don't know.
In the 70s?
It was a very big one. There's a whole bunch of them in California that were known for being very large.
What were their successful actions? Because you know a little bit about it, don't you?
There's a video I've watched. There's a video channel. There's a couple instances of that video on YouTube where a guy who was one of the early executives of the mission does a video and tells you how they ran it. And it's on a YouTube channel called Ronzorg. And you can watch the video there. So I'd say if you want to know how they ran it, listen to that. That gives you numbers of how many people they had on course and how many people they had in and how they did it.
Well, what did you?
Riverside was just one of several. There was Riverside, there was Davis, there was Stevens Creek, there was a whole bunch of big ones.
What did you notice when you were actually in them in the 70s? A big difference between them and then going into an org in the 90s or something. What was the big difference between those missions?
They cared. They want, or even in the church also. the missions and the churches in the 1970s wanted the people who were in there for services to do well. They didn't milk them. They actually wanted to make sure that they got fair dinkum exchange. That was point number one. Number two, as Ron puts it, you want trained staff. So the staff in the missions were highly trained and highly processed. Church staff nowadays aren't trained and processed. If you want competent auditors and course soups, train them and process them. They will function well. And everybody on staff, train them and process them. That's what it was like. Those mission staff were trained and processed, treated well. The course rooms were full. I mean, Ron says, if you actually deliver standard tech, the place will fill up. Run a good course room, the place will fill up. Those course rooms were packed. Instead of Miscavige going to the missions and saying, you've got packed course rooms, the church doesn't, you must be doing something right, please help us. He was arrogant. He accused the missions of criminality. This is what a criminal tends to do.
Yeah.
A criminal tends to think, and an evil person tends to think, that other people are as evil as they are.
Yeah.
And they aren't.
Yeah.
And this is why you know Miscavige was evil and is evil. He attributes to others what he does.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even though they aren't doing it.
Yeah.
And that is why he had to crush the mission network. He had to crush the mission network. He had to crush Geo because they were a challenge. He had to crush everybody in any role that had any credibility.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that David Mayo was a saint, but he had to get rid of David Mayo, and he did it very expertly. David Mayo had decades of experience as a Class 12. Miscavige didn't have that much experience.
Yeah, SPs take out their competition. It's what they do. Like they create monopolies in industries and stuff. They're not for trying to make the best product and competing and doing better. They see someone who's sparking and they take it down. That's what they do.
Anybody that's a good person is a threat.
Yeah.
Is there a Class 12 trained by LRH still in the church? I've heard that there isn't. I'm not surprised.
What was it like when you went clear? You went clear in the church, did you?
I won't go into that.
Okay. Well, what does it feel like to be clear?
I've been clear for quite a while, so I'd rather not go into that.
All right.
Remember, I'm a past
yeah,
life.
I know. Yeah, it's not.
Yeah, so I won't go into it.
Well, what can let's say if somebody hasn't done any Scientology, what can they expect from going clear? Like, what sort of the sensation or the feeling or?
To me, there's a lot of the things that I have experienced in terms of case gain, I only realized later. For instance, after the very comprehensive communication course at Stevens Creek, I did life repair with them. And it wasn't until months later that I realized there were changes. And I know this may sound a little bit weird, but all too often, you'll have gains that you don't even realize you have until later. And I'm not a case supervisor, so I don't know what happens with most people when they go clear. But as often happens with me, I don't realize I've got something attained until well after that.
What would be an example of that?
There's often things that would happen when I was auditing Solo Knots or Excalibur that, I would have a major thing happen in session, because obviously you have some sessions you handle more things than others. And it wasn't until well after that I realized that there was something that changed about that time. Sometimes it's a shocker. I remember one OT5 session that I had, a new OT5 session I had at the AO, where there was something so heavy that happened that I actually had to hold the wall as I was going to the examiner. It was that destabilizing. It was that much of a change of what was going on. But to me, most changes are gradual. So I know it's not a concise answer or precise answer, but to me, it's a lot of times a realization that you've had a change rather than really later on, rather than realizing, oh, this just happened. That's the way it tends to happen with me. I'm not saying that's the way it happens with others, but that's how it happens with me.
Yeah, well, I think it's like I could get maybe a gradual a win that you I don't know that happened slowly, right? And then you're
Mm,
going along, and then suddenly you get suddenly really keyed in, and you go, "Oh fuck, I was actually feeling really good a week ago. I didn't even realize it." You know what I mean?
mm,
Like, but you don't realize it until you hit a real big, like, you get keyed in by something, or you hit a real big problem, and you're like something like, "Oh wow, I was actually really good a week ago." I now like that's what kind of I noticed with me. It was like, oh, now I feel like what I felt like years ago. I was actually doing really good a week ago. I wasn't even really aware of that. It's like, yeah, you can get like a win. It's gradual, and you don't notice it. Sort of, it's
yeah.
a bit like that.
Or you don't necessarily realize you have a skill until well after you attained it.
Yeah,
Yep,
yeah, it's interesting.
common.
Yeah, cool. All right. Well, thanks for being on the podcast, Andrew.
Okay.
Yeah. If anyone wants to contact you about do you want to anyone to contact you about anything?
Um, well, I'm pursuing several projects that helps Scientology expand. I won't go into them in detail. If anyone wants to help on those, let me know. If there's anybody in Australia and New Zealand that wants to do OT levels or whether it's OT 123 or Excalibur, we can make sure they get them delivered. I don't deliver them myself. Um, or even want to do training or also get auditing up to clear. Let me know. There are people on all the continents except Antarctica that do things, and there are people in Australia that provide delivery as well. So let me know if they want to get, they can communicate via you, or I'll give you an email address you can put below the video.
In the
And
comments, do you want to say the email now?
no, I'll give it to you.
Okay. All
I'll give it
right.
to you. Just put it underneath.
All right. See you later, Andrew.
See you. Bye bye.
Bye. Alrighty then. That is the end of the interview with Andrew Fleisher. I hope you liked it. I had a bit of fun on that. I thought it was good. We got some interesting information from him. Now, before we end off this podcast, I've got an LIH quote, an L. Ron Hubbard quote. Today, the bulk of the human race is walking around with the belief that there is something wrong somewhere, but they don't quite know what it is. Yes, it's very correct, and that's from What It Means to Be a Scientologist. It's very, I mean, maybe he wrote that, I don't know when that was, in the 60s or 70s, but that was when things started to go a bit, whoa, people in the 60s, things started to go a bit wild in the 60s and 70s, and a bit like, whoa, something's not quite right. And now with the internet really exposing things and a lot of people finding out the truth about conspiracies and all this sorts of stuff, and spirituality as well, people are starting to go, oh, there's something quite wrong, and they're starting to find out what it is. And it's really interesting times. And I think if there's ever a time for people to get into Scientology, it is now. I think now people are going to start going, oh, yeah. 50 years ago, you couldn't just hit on the internet and find out about information about reincarnation and kids being born saying, I used to be this person in my past life and all this sort of stuff. And you can't hear stories. 50 years ago, it was hard to hear stories about people moving objects with their mind or just all these unusual things and the conspiracies. You couldn't just research them as easily as you can now. That's why LIH was just so ahead of his time. He was about 50 years ahead of his time, I personally think. If Scientology was coming out like in 2010, if it was like invented then, it would have been perfectly modern, on the cusp, exactly right. But it came out 50 years earlier than that, and it kind of was just too advanced. It was so ahead of its time, Scientology. But anyway, now is just the prime time for Scientology to expand. It's just like, whoa, everything's set. It's quite interesting. So, It's the end of the podcast. Thanks for listening. It's time for you to climb back out of this funky rabbit hole, out of this Scientology world. If you like this adventure, make sure you subscribe to the podcast. Thanks for listening. I've been Andy Nolch, the Space Cowboy. And until next time, take care of yourself and climb up that bridge.